Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. The bus pulled away. I stood alone in front of the gas station, hating my life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, making the place feel even more isolated. My afternoon shift began at 5 p.m. and ended at midnight. My boyfriend had agreed to pick me up most days, but the idea of leaving so late still wasn't thrilling. Obviously, it wasn't my first choice of work, but money was money, and I needed a job. I pushed open the glass door. A small bell jingled above me, but the place felt empty. The shelves were lined with dusty snacks and overpriced car accessories. Behind the counter stood the grumpiest-looking man I had ever seen, staring at the register like he wanted to punch it. A name tag hung onto the front of his shirt. Greg, manager. Hello, I'm Dash. You're Sarah, he said, barely looking up. Yeah. Lockers in the back, he huffed. Use Gary's. I'm sharing with someone else? Nah, I fired him last week. About time. He was slow in the head, couldn't even scan barcodes right. Eyes pointed sideways. Couldn't understand a flippin' word he was saying. Thought we could save some money with him as a cheap hire, but the artard probably lost us more than that. I hesitated before nodding. All right. Before I could turn away, the door behind me jingled again. A man in a worn baseball cap and flannel jacket stepped inside, balancing a couple of small packages. He turned to me. You must be the new girl, he said, his voice warm and friendly. He had a slight southern accent. Great to meet you, I said, relieved that at least someone here seemed nice. I'm Martin, he said, setting the boxes down on the counter and shaking my hand. I come by a few times a day, mostly deliveries, but most of the time it'll just be you and Greg. He glanced at Greg, whose face was scrunched into a permanent frown, then looked back at me. Bless your heart, he said with pity, then left. I forced a smile at Greg before heading to the locker room. The room was cramped and the air inside was stale. A set of 2 lockers sat on top of each other. The bottom one with a padlock had a paper sticker label that read Martin in black Sharpie, and the one above it said Gary. I pulled it open and was about to dump my coat and bag inside when I spotted a small, beat-up paperback notebook tucked in the corner. The book had a brown cover and worn edges, the paper soft from use. I flicked through the notebook. The first page was filled with squares and lines, and the rest with other doodles, circles, swirls, stick figures, little animals. Some of the pages had been pressed so hard the marks left grooves in the paper. Picturing a mentally disabled man being shouted at by Greg every other minute, I chewed the inside of my cheek. I set the notebook on top of the lockers so that if Gary ever came back, it would be there waiting for him. Then I got to work cleaning the place for the evening. Apart from the main shop, there was just a locker room, a break room, and a bathroom in the back with a clogged sink. I was glad it wasn't a huge area to clean at least, and already pretty spotless. I served some customers for a few hours, and went to the break room to have my dinner. Martin was in there, scarfing down a pepperoni pizza. How's it going? He asked, taking another bite. We had a chat, and I asked him about Gary. Yeah, he got the boot last week, Martin confirmed. He was this handicapped guy customers kept complaining about. A woman came in and asked him if there was a bathroom. He pointed at the locker room. Should have seen the look on Greg's face. Martin chuckled to himself. After I had settled into the new job, the days passed by surprisingly quickly. Sometimes it was unnerving being alone at the till when it was dark out, but otherwise nothing out of the ordinary really happened. I was told the morning was busier, which I suspected, as usually max 10 people would come during my entire shift. One night as I was cleaning, I checked my phone. Still no messages from my boyfriend. Annoyed he was running late, I grabbed the vacuum and started cleaning through the aisles, trying to pass the time. As I was cleaning, the pattern I was moving in seemed familiar, like déjà vu. I was walking through a snake-like path of 6 rows. Then it occurred to me, was that the pattern I had seen in the first page of Gary's notebook? I propped the vacuum against a shelf and went to the locker room, plucking the notebook off the top of the lockers. Indeed, there were 5 straight rectangular lines inside a larger box, creating 6 spaces between them. The lines weren't just random markings. They were the shelves between the aisles. Next to the big box were a few smaller boxes. I realized one was the locker room on the far left. Next to it was the break room. and on the adjacent side was a box that must have represented the bathroom. Perhaps Gary wasn't as dim as they thought. I smiled to myself. Then there was one more box behind the one in the locker room's position, which was shaded in. I frowned, looking back up. From where I stood, the store had 4 rooms. There was no 5th. I looked down at the notebook again. The extra room was marked right next to the locker room. I turned toward the locker room door, staring at it. A large filing cabinet with a bunch of cardboard boxes stacked on top of it stood in the corner. I nudged the cabinet forward a little. Just wall. Then I heard footsteps across the shop coming towards the locker room. I shifted the cabinet back into place. Greg emerged in the locker room doorway, arms crossed. His eyes flicked around the room before landing on me. "Your boyfriend's looking for you," he said flatly. "Right. Thanks." Greg didn't move as I walked past him, but I could feel his eyes lingering on me. I tried to shake it off as I stepped outside into the cool night air with my boyfriend. For the next week of my shift, I started feeling anxious every time I entered the locker room and saw the cabinet for some reason. I even moved the cabinet a few times to check a secret door hadn't appeared. Maybe there used to be a room behind there, or Gary's drawing wasn't accurate. After a while, I naturally forgot about it until I began noticing something about Martin. Most of the time, he took boxes from deliveries straight to the break room, where we kept extra stock and supplies. That made sense. Greg would unpack them for me to stack onto the shelves. But every few days, at the end of the day just before I left, I saw him taking large packages to the locker room. He would come out empty-handed. When I entered the locker room after, I never saw any packages. I bumped into him entering the locker room with a large package one night. "Oh hey, see you tomorrow," he said, and he immediately turned back out of the room with the package, heading towards the break room. As I was about to leave that night, I saw him exit the break room and walk with the package back towards the locker room. One night, I moved the cabinet again. As expected, nothing out of the ordinary. But this time before I replaced the cabinet, I looked down. I noticed a faint, large square-shaped outline on the ground where the cabinet had been sitting. There was a small key-shaped hole inside the square to one side. I stared in disbelief, then stepped on the area a few times. It moved slightly. So this was where the Martin's packages had been mysteriously disappearing. Footsteps were getting closer. I shoved the cabinet back into place and left the room. Greg stood silently, right outside against the wall, startling me as I walked out. "Giving yourself a break, I see?" I shook my head and went back to the till. For the next few days, I didn't attempt to move the cabinet again. I was afraid of being caught, but the uncomfortable feeling lingered. There was probably nothing interesting down there, but a part of me was certain such a well-hidden door would hold secrets behind it. And perhaps Gary was fired for discovering something he shouldn't have. On a pitch-black Friday night, my boyfriend turned on the engine and was about to drive us away when I spotted Martin taking a parcel out of the back of his van. It was one of those larger boxes he sometimes brought to the locker room. I watched him as he walked into the gas station, having left his van doors open. Curiosity overwhelmed me. "Babe, hold on a sec, I'll be back," I said. I jumped out of the passenger side and ran across the parking lot until I was standing just outside the open doors. Stacks of cardboard boxes were taped up tightly. I stepped into the van and pushed one of the boxes closest to the entrance of the back of the van. It shifted slightly, and I could tell there were multiple smaller items inside, but the sound of liquid was unmistakable. My eyes drifted to a sheet of paper on top of the box. I picked it up. Heart X10. Tick. Liver X10. Tick. Kidney X10 pairs. Tick. I looked back and spotted Martin coming out of the gas station. Then he spotted me too. We locked eyes and he looked surprised at first, but then his expression turned into one of rage. He normally had an easygoing expression, so seeing his face contort like that was genuinely the stuff of nightmares. He started sprinting towards the van. I jumped out so fast I hit the floor rolling, then got up and ran as fast as I could towards my boyfriend's car. "We're getting the fuck out of here, let's go, let's fucking go," I yelled as I slammed the door shut. I called the cops as we sped away, and explained everything, from discovering Gary's notebook and the secret door to the boxes in Martin's van. Greg and Martin were promptly arrested. The cops discovered refrigerators full of boxes of human organs underneath the locker room, and they were charged with organ trafficking and money laundering. They had been smuggling them as part of a larger operation and distributing them to buyers around the country from the dark web. Gary was a mentally disabled man who had been an employee at the gas station before I joined. For a while, I worried about Gary's safety, but that concern didn't last long. He was found and arrested the next day. Turns out, he wasn't just a bystander. He had been coerced into the operation, fully complicit in the horrors unfolding behind that hidden door. Maybe the law will go easier on him, given that his brain never matured past that of a 6-year-old. But there's one detail I doubt they'll overlook. Greg didn't fire him out of pity or frustration. He fired him when he caught him stealing and eating the organs. Gather around, listen to me. Every once in a while, on the day of the blue moon, the wind will come. You can tell when the wind is coming because the air smells like cranberries and a part of the sky turns lime green. The wind is not like the lovely breeze that flutters your hair, nor is it the cold chill of a day in the snow. It does not blow bubbles, and it does not move the leaves. It is hard to explain the wind. My grandmother was the one who explained it to me, and her parents are the ones who explained it to her. Would you like me to tell you her story? Of course. Come close. My grandmother was your age when her first wind blew. She grew up in a town on a beach with sand that glittered like diamonds, and where the air was warm and smelled of salt. She was out on her farm with her family when a part of the sky suddenly turned lime green, like the color of the lime popsicles. Her baba suddenly picked her up and carried her quickly towards the house. They left all their things behind. Her tata quickly opened the door and let them inside. My grandmother's mama and baba were quick to spring to action. Her baba began covering the windows with papers and tape. Her mama started making walls out of the furniture, like stacking Legos one atop the other. My grandmother's tata returned to her bed in the corner of the room and proceeded to take a nap. While they worked, my grandmother asked her parents questions about the wind. She asked what it sounded like. Her baba explained how the wind made sounds that were loud and confusing. He told her it could sound like the time Mama dropped her glass, and the pieces shattered like diamonds across the kitchen floor. Or it could make sounds like the fireworks during the festival that shot into the sky and looked like blooming flowers. Her baba explained to her that the wind could whisper, it could even talk. It could sound like anyone. A friend asking for something. Someone saying they want to help. Screams. And that it was very, very important to never speak to the voices. My grandmother asked her baba why. Her baba explained that the wind could take her voice if it hears her speak. Usually it only lasts a few days, like when her baba lost his voice because he had been coughing for a long time, even when her mama made his tea with honey. Her baba explained that sometimes, if you are too young or have a sore throat, and especially when the air smells like cranberries, the wind could take someone's voice forever. Do you smell that? It's cranberries. My grandmother touched her throat and thought about never singing again, never telling her tata she loved her, never telling anyone anything again. She wondered if she would be lonely without a voice. My grandmother asked her mama why she was putting their shoes under the door. Her mama explained how the wind moved quietly and could creep underneath. She explained that it was very, very important to keep the door closed and stay far away from it, because the wind could open doors. My grandmother asked her mama how the wind could open doors. Her mama explained that the wind could pretend to be a person, that it could look like anyone or anything, that it wasn't real, but it could look more real than anything. Her mama explained that if the wind opens the door, it is very, very important to close her eyes immediately. My grandmother asked her mama why. Her mama explained that if she looked at the wind for more than a few seconds, it would take her eyes. My grandmother touched her eyes and thought about what it would be like to never see her mama's face, to never watch her baba fish for mullet out on the sea, or watch the fish rise up like jewels from the water, to never see the birds on the olive trees outside their home, to never see the spices and colorful arrays of food at the market when she goes shopping with her mama. She wondered if she would be sad without her sight. Her mama and her baba finished their tasks of building walls and securing shoes. Her baba picked her up in his arms once more. They went to the bed where her tata was napping, and all of them got under the covers and cuddled. Gather close. My grandmother thought about the rules her parents had taught her. Never respond to the voices, even if they sound friendly. Never make a sound, because the wind could steal her voice. Never look at the wind. No matter how much she might want to, she wanted to see her family's faces more. It's okay, shhhh. She heard the noises and the voices, the screams. She stayed quiet with her eyes shut tight, even when there was a confusing noise that scared her and she really wanted to cry. She was quiet. Just like that, good job, guys. Tears came out, and the rough thumb of her baba wiped them gently. He whispered to her so softly that she almost couldn't hear it. He explained that it was just the wind, and it's not real. For a moment she was shocked that her Baba talked, but then she remembered that he was old. And the wind took young or sick voices. Not old voices. Yes, I am very old, shhhh. She snuggled into her Baba's chest with her mama hugging her from behind, and fell asleep. Silent, safe, with her eyes shut tight. It's okay, shhhh. Shut your eyes, friends. It's okay, it's just the wind. It's not real. It's not. I have been a newspaper delivery substitute for over 2 years now. My route is not very long. I am usually busy for 2 hours. We live in a very rural area surrounded by mountains and wooded hillsides. Some houses are built right at the tree line. Wild animals are surprisingly rare here, though I have seen some deer in the woods. Pets are much more common. There are a lot of cats, which is probably why I was not really bothered when these things started happening. Half a year ago, I was distributing the newspaper as always. I reached the last street on my route. 5 houses in one line. The first 3 were pretty new, the 4th was an old shag, owned by an old man, and the last one was a holiday home, usually empty when I was there. When I reached house 2 that day, I was shocked. A dead bird had been left beneath the mailbox. I quickly brushed it off as a cat's prey. Nothing bad, nothing scary, but the bird was not cleaned up. Its corpse stayed on the ground, slowly decaying more and more. I felt sorry for the bird and grossed out. I did not want to touch it. I thought that was the reason the bird was still there. No one wanted to clean it up. Eventually I became numb to it. Now only a few weeks ago I was once again in that street, finishing my tour as I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. A fish was lying in the driveway of the old shag. Okay, I thought, nothing strange. There is a river nearby, an animal caught it, dragged it up here and left it. Plausible solution. Except that the fish was lying perfectly vertical, as if it had been placed there, and its lower half was missing. Just gone, with a clean cut. Teeth could not do that, but a knife could, so a human must have placed the fish there. Okay, I thought, never mind. I'll mind my own business. I went home and took a shower. Only then did I notice that the fish did not smell bad. On a warm day like this, the fish would have started to rot way too soon. A chill run down my spine as I realized that the fish must have been placed there only minutes before I had entered the street. I closed my curtains tightly that night. It began to give me the creeps, but I kept doing the job. My rational mind kept telling me that everything had a logical explanation, and I was just too scared to see it. Besides, I needed the money. Today I made my rounds again. The road was quiet. No dead animals, nothing. That was until I climbed the stairs to the Holdy home. I put a newspaper into the mailbox and turned around, my gaze washing over the trees. Fear sank into my stomach like a stone. In a tree, not more than 10 feet from me, a deer's head hung from a branch. The flesh had rotted away, leaving nothing but pale bones. My ragged breathing was the only sound. Every bird, every animal, even the wind, had stopped. The empty eyes of the deer's head seemed to dig into my head, my thoughts. Deeper and deeper, until they seemed to see everything of me. Everything I ever was. Everything I'll ever be. The sound of breaking wood filled my ears, and the skull fell to the ground. Its magic was broken. I ran home, closed the curtains, and covered myself with the blanket, shivering under the sheet. My sweaty hair clung to my body, and my dirty clothes were far too warm. I tried to breathe. Its eyes were still in my head, and every thought seemed to be watched by them. It took hours before I could move again. I have a feeling that something not natural is happening. Something horrible. I don't want to go back there. I want to keep my curtains closed forever. But I cannot forget those eyes. I am scared. So scared. The sky turned red at 9:42 a.m. I was on 5th Avenue, coffee in hand, when the first ripple of sound reached us. It wasn't a boom or a crash. It was a low, gut-deep vibration that made the air feel too thick to breathe. People stopped, looking around like confused animals before a storm. Then the ground trembled. Windows rattled. The coffee shop behind me spilled customers into the street. Nobody knew what had happened. Phones buzzed with emergency alerts, but they were vague. Global impact event. Seek immediate shelter. Some people ran. Some stood frozen, staring up at the sky like answers might be written there. But there was nothing, just that red haze deepening across the clouds, turning the sun into a dull, bloody smudge. A woman next to me clutched my arm. Is it war?" she asked, her voice trembling. I had no answer. Minutes later, the first shockwave hit. I didn't hear it so much as feel it. like the earth itself had been struck with a hammer. Every car alarm in the city screamed at once. Glass exploded from windows in a shimmering rain. People fell to their knees, clutching their ears. My coffee slipped from my hand as I stumbled back against a taxi. Somewhere, a building groaned like a living thing, steel and concrete protesting the strain. I didn't know it then, but halfway across the world, an asteroid the size of Alaska had plunged into the heart of the Indian Ocean. The impact released energy equivalent to tens of billions of nuclear bombs, vaporizing millions of gallons of water and punching a hole through the Earth's crust. A column of steam, molten rock, and debris shot into the sky, breaching the stratosphere and darkening the sun within minutes. The shockwave traveled through the Earth's mantle, triggering earthquakes that shattered cities from Mumbai to Perth. Entire islands vanished beneath walls of water as tsunamis surged outward, racing faster than jet planes. Indonesia, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, gone within hours. The waves hit the coasts of Africa and Australia next, flooding entire nations before barreling across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In New York, thousands of miles from ground zero, we felt the earth shudder beneath our feet. The Hudson River surged beyond its banks, flooding lower Manhattan with icy water and dragging cars and debris through the streets. Bridges groaned under the strain, and the Statue of Liberty vanished behind walls of mist and rain. The moment the first shockwave passed, the streets of New York became chaos. People screamed and ran in every direction. Cars collided as drivers panicked, and glass from shattered windows crunched beneath my shoes as I stumbled forward. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't think, I just moved. Adrenaline carried me through the crowd as if my body had decided to survive before my mind could catch up. Sirens blared from every direction, but their wails blended into the background noise of panic. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, another emergency alert flashing across the screen. Shelter in place. Avoid exposure. Take cover immediately. I remember turning onto a side street to avoid the mass of people flooding Fifth Avenue. The pavement beneath my feet trembled with aftershocks, and somewhere in the distance, a building collapsed with a sound like thunder. Dust and smoke hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. When I finally reached my apartment building, 7 blocks away, it was as if my legs gave out all at once. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking too hard to grip them properly. Behind me, the distant roar of the Hudson River swelling over its banks echoed through the air. I shoved the door open and staggered inside, slamming it shut behind me as if that thin piece of wood could keep the world out. The stairwell was dark, the power had already gone out, and I had to climb 6 flights of stairs by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. Every step echoed like a countdown, each breath fogging the air as the building's temperature dropped. When I finally reached my apartment and locked the door behind me, I stood in the silence and let the weight of everything hit me all at once. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside the window, the city burned beneath a sky that no longer belonged to us. And that's when I realized, the world as we knew it had ended. But I was still here. Then rain came as I watched from my window. Thick and black, carrying ash and pulverized rock from halfway across the world. By nightfall, the fires had begun. Molten debris, hurled into space by the impact, rained down across the globe like falling stars. Forests ignited from Siberia to the Amazon. Cities burned as flaming stones crashed through rooftops and shattered glass towers. Smoke and ash choked the skies, blotting out the moon and turning night into a suffocating, endless twilight. The days that followed were a blur of fear and desperation. The air grew colder as the sun disappeared behind a veil of dust and soot. Crops withered in the fields, and animals starved or suffocated as the world entered a nuclear winter. Cities fell silent as their people fled or died. Governments collapsed. Communications failed. By the 3rd week, New York had become a city of shadows. The streets were filled with abandoned cars and the distant echoes of footsteps that never seemed to come close. Fires burned unchecked, their smoke mixing with the ever-present ash that fell from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, the Hudson River continued to rise, fed by storms that never seemed to end. The air smelled of salt and decay, and each breath burned my throat. I rationed what food I had, conserving cans of soup and crackers like they were gold. Water was harder to come by. The taps had stopped running within days, and the bottled supply in my apartment wouldn't last forever. I collected rainwater when I could, filtering it through makeshift cloth screens to catch the ash and grit that fell from the sky. Nights were the worst. Without power, The world outside my window became a void of blackness, broken only by the distant flicker of fires still smoldering in the city's ruins. The silence was so deep it felt alive, broken only by the occasional distant crack of collapsing buildings or the howling wind that carried the distant echoes of sirens and screams. I slept in fits and starts, huddled beneath blankets and coats as the temperature inside the apartment plummeted. The cold seeped into my bones, and I woke each morning with frost clinging to the glass and the ache of hunger gnawing at my stomach. Still, I held on. It's been a year now. New York is a city of ghosts. Most of its people are gone, lost to hunger, sickness, or the long, silent sleep that comes when the cold becomes too much to bear. Those of us who remain live like shadows, scavenging through the frozen ruins, our breath fogging the air as we huddle against the endless night. The fires have long since burned out, leaving only blackened shells of buildings and streets choked with ash and debris. Snow falls year-round now, gray and heavy, carrying the taste of smoke and iron. The air is thin, and each breath feels like pulling ice into my lungs. I've stopped keeping track of the days. The sun still rises somewhere beyond the clouds, but its light is weak and distant, casting only a faint, dim glow that barely touches the earth. Sometimes, when the clouds break, I look up at the sky and wonder if anyone else is still out there, or if we're all just waiting for the last ember of humanity to flicker out. I don't know how this ends, but when it does, I hope the earth remembers us not for how we died, but for how long we tried to hold on. The two men lay prone on a hill. John scans the area with binoculars while Nick sights through a sniper rifle. They are quiet, knowing better than to talk outside the compound's protective walls. This is a job that must be done. Despite all the precautions taken, sometimes they just wander too close. That's why the two men are here. They'll clear up any stragglers in the area and keep the compound safe. John nudges Nick gently, indicating a woman shambling out of the trees. A tattered veil trails behind her, catching and tearing on branches. Nick snorts softly, watching the woman in the blood-splattered wedding gown pause as she finally exits the forest. Rose smiles to herself as she adjusts the veil a final time. Today is the biggest day of her life. Today is her wedding day. She's finally marrying the man of her dreams, Alex. The only thing missing is some guests. With the recent riots, not everyone could make it. Rose understands that, but she still wishes that all of her friends and family could be here today. The carefully selected band didn't even show. They aren't answering their phones either. Still, it could be worse. Rose's smile never falters as she nods to an usher. The wedding march is piped through the church's sound system as she starts the walk towards her husband-to-be. At least they have a stereo for some music. Alex stands tall and proud in his marine dress blues. His eyes grow misty as he watches his bride approach. A part of him feels guilty, but he pushes that part down. This is his wedding day. He was given leave, and he hasn't been recalled. His unit must be handling the riots fine without him. What chance do unarmed and unorganized rioters have against the Marines? The preacher smiles at those assembled before him and begins to speak. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Rose and Alex stare at each other, their hands clasped. The world has faded to just them. No one and nothing else matters. If anyone here objects to this marriage. The preacher jumps as banging sounds on the heavy church door as the guests turn to look. Well, I've never actually had anyone object before. He mutters under his breath to some laughter. An usher quickly stands and rushes to open the door. Likely just a latecomer, Alex reassures his bride, who is looking queasy and nervous. She nods with a smile, trusting him utterly. The usher opens the door, then screams and turns to run. He doesn't get far. Someone pounces and begins to violently tear at his back. Blood splatters the church walls, splashing obscenely over a statue of the Holy Mother. Is that the band? Rose whispers as Alex pushes her behind him. The guests scream in panic at the grisly scene before them. They stumble backward, pushing and shoving as the rest of the seemingly demonic band appears in the doorway and rushes forward. The band attacks any guests they can get their hands on, tearing at flesh with terrifying howls of enjoyment at the taste of raw flesh. Alex draws his Beretta 92 FS one-handed, pushing Rose behind him. We have to go. There's too many. I fucking knew I should have packed an extra mag. He sights down the pistol, firing 3 rapid shots into the center mass of the cellist. The cellist rocks back, howling before rushing forward again. What the fuck? What the fuck? He mutters before shooting again. This time taking the thing down with a shot to the head. "13 shots left," Alex whispers, knowing that even if every shot is perfect, he doesn't have enough. There are too many guests. His eyes narrow with concentration as he keeps firing, his breath even and calm despite the panic hovering at the edge of his consciousness. His bride is here, and he's not sure he can protect her. 10 bodies lay before the altar by the time the pistol's slide locks back. Empty. He's empty, and there are more of those things coming. It wasn't enough to protect Rose. Alex holsters the pistol on pure instinctual training and grasps a heaving candlestick. He will not go down without a fight. Rose screams as Alex pushes her back, towards the back office. He's breathing hard as he slams the door, dragging a heavy end table over to further block it. The line is dead. Rose looks at him with wide eyes as the receiver drops from her limp hands. Alex leans against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. "It's fine. We'll wait it out. I won't leave you." He takes Rose into his arms, comforting her. He knows he's made a grave mistake, a mistake that will cost them both their lives. He can hear the wedding guests growl at the door, slamming themselves against it. It's like they can sense there's prey trapped inside, like they can smell the humanity of those within. This office is a dead end. The window is too small to escape through, and there's only one exit, which is now blocked by those who came to see the happiest day of his life. Alex takes Rose into his arms again, kissing her deeply. "I do." She blinks in confusion. That was the next part. He takes a pair of golden rings from his pocket. "I, Alexander Hall, take you, Rose Butler, for my lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I will love and honor you all the days of my life." Rose smiles at him, tears in her eyes as she slips the ring onto his finger. "I, Rose Butler, take you, Alexander Hall, for my lawful husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I will love and honor you all the days of my life." She sobs softly as he slips the ring onto her finger and kisses her deeply. Rose clings to him, jumping each time a body thuds against the office door. I have something I need to tell you," she whispers. "I was going to wait until after the wedding, but—" "Alex, I'm pregnant." Alex looks at her, a brilliant smile breaking across his face. "Oh, honey." The happy expression fades as the door jumps as another body hits it and starts to splinter. Tears roll down his cheeks as he looks at the door and back to his beautiful bride. The bloodied and torn hands reach in through the gaps of the door, reaching for them as howls fill the air. Can he really let his bride die so painfully? So horrifically? Alex kisses his wife a final time, holding her tightly before he moves behind her and swiftly breaks her neck. At least she won't suffer. Alex collapses onto the floor, sobbing as he cradles his wife's body. He looks up as the door finally breaks, the end table doing little now to stop the onslaught. He smiles at Rose as she twitches and growls, rising up to glare at him with hunger in her eyes. "I love you, honey." He gently strokes her face, further words drowned in a gurgle of blood as she tears his throat out. Nick's finger hesitates on the trigger of the rifle, then loosens as a man exits the thicket of trees. He's dressed in what once was marine blues, and he stops next to the woman. They look at each other before turning and shambling into the sunset, away from the compound. "They're no threat," he whispers to John. For years, she had lived alone. No husband, no children, just the house, the garden, and the silence. The kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a warm blanket. The mornings were spent in the garden, her garden, where the roses bloomed in clusters of crimson and white. She hummed to herself as she trimmed, water splashing softly onto the earth, the sunlight falling just right between the leaves. And she liked it that way. But lately things hadn't felt quite right. At first, it was just small things. A chair that wasn't quite where she'd left it. A picture frame that seemed to have shifted a few inches. And then the laughter. A child's laughter. It echoed through the halls late at night when everything was still, but she told herself it was just the wind. Just her imagination. But the more she tried to ignore it, the louder it became. One night, the laughter was joined by footsteps. Little feet, light and quick, walking across the old floorboards upstairs. But she had no children. There was only the house, and her. Then came the voices. A man and a woman arguing in a distant room. "We should leave. We can't just go. We've spent everything on this house." She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to drown out the sounds that rattled the walls. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the noises only grew louder. One night, after the arguing had become too much to bear, she screamed, "Leave me alone!" And just like that, silence. The house went still. For the first time in weeks, the eerie noises stopped. She slept soundly, thinking she had finally rid herself of whatever haunted the house. Until the next morning, when she stepped outside and saw them. A family, a man, a woman, and a child, stood on the front lawn, staring at the house. They were whispering to each other, eyes wide and uneasy. She froze, heart pounding. They could see her. The woman shivered, turning to her husband. "I think this house is haunted." The old woman's breath caught in her throat. She was the house. She was the one who had always lived here. They didn't need to know her. She didn't need to be seen. So they called a psychic. The psychic stood still for a long moment, eyes closed, listening. Then she smiled softly. "She's not haunting the house," the psychic said in a calm voice. "She's part of it." The old woman's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean? "She's been here a long time. She doesn't know she's gone." The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. She was here. She had always been here. Hadn't she? The psychic turned toward the garden, toward the roses that she had tended for so long. "She just loves the garden," the psychic said, her voice soft. The family stared at the garden, unsure of what to make of it. But the child's eyes were wide. She stepped forward, as if drawn by something invisible, and stared into the blooming flowers. And that's when the old woman felt it. Her hand brushed against the window. She hadn't realized she was standing there until the cool glass was pressed against her palm. She looked down at the roses, the laughter, the voices, the moving objects. It had never been the house that was haunted. It had always been her. And as the wind rustled through the garden, the roses swayed with it, whispering softly in the breeze. But this time, the laughter was warm, like an old friend returning after a long absence. The house was hers, and she would always care for it. My wife will not stop eating. April 23rd. Chapter 1. My wife's sickness. I texted in a group chat with all of my friends. "Are we ready for tonight?" Everyone responded agreeing that they couldn't wait anymore. How all of them would get drunk and have the best time of their life. We had a party for one of our other friends, just stupid guy stuff, hanging out, the fun adult life. I was getting ready to party with all my friends tonight. Food, alcohol, games, and more good stuff, if you know what I mean. I dropped a big cooler by the front door, and I heard a sudden loud thud from upstairs. I ran up to see my wife on the floor, holding her stomach hard, like she could squeeze out her own organs. I ran up to her asking if she was okay. She only grunted and whimpered like someone had just attacked her. I grabbed my phone and called 911, asking for an ambulance. I was with her the entire ride to the hospital, holding, gripping, tightening her hand with mine. She was in pain, and I couldn't do anything. I didn't even know what was happening to her. After a few hours of waiting at the hospital, impatiently walking around the room, waiting for any kind of news, it felt like days. Until I heard the click of the door opening, a doctor walked inside of the room with a chart. I asked him, "William, finally, what the hell happened to her?" The doctor sighed, looking at the chart again. "Doctor, we don't exactly know. Her stomach seemed to have just grew a few inches. You'd normally see this in a long-term effect, gas, toxic waste, fluid buildup. It also looked scarred." "William, what, like something cut her stomach?" "Doctor, and healed it in a matter of minutes. It's not something that even we can explain. But what we can do is offer her a prescription of probiotic supplements, something to help her pass waste easier, and maybe something to help with the pain." "William, what else can we do? This isn't normal, right?" "Doctor, I'll say give it a few days, 2 to 3 weeks maybe, come back and we'll see how everything is." "William, right, thanks, doctor." I took her home, made sure she was staying in bed to rest, and made her take her pills. She hates pills, but she needed to. I unfortunately had to cancel of my friends last minute. They whined, but I didn't really care at that moment. My wife was in pain, something strange had happened to her, and I felt sick to my stomach, this feeling of weakness, unable to do anything only to wait and see what stupid fucking pills are going to do. Sorry, stress of the job was why I was excited to go out with my friends. We went back home, and I had trouble sleeping. My wife kept making weird clicking noises and stomach grumbles. I tried waking her up a bunch. She wouldn't wake up. So, I eventually tuned it out and went to bed. April 24th. I woke up today to my wife, well on the toilet, vomiting and well shitting. She was sitting on the toilet holding a bucket in her lap. It was like this for an hour. I went outside of the bathroom after 10 minutes of pauses between long coughing and gagging on her own vomit. I couldn't take it. I called the doctor again, asking if this was in any way, shape, or form even possible for someone. He told me that, "Doctor, it's possible the sudden change in her stomach caused something to make the pills more effective than needed, and to just be by her side with water, a lot of water." Another 10 minutes passed by of god-awful sounds that I couldn't bear to hear it anymore. I wanted them to stop, but if they did, I'm worried of what that would mean. Would it? No. I have to be there for her. And finally, I ran into the bathroom, holding a cup of water near her and putting my hand on her shoulder. "William, honey. Honey, are you all right?" She breathed out weakly, trying to grab the cup. Of course I helped her, moved her head back and poured some water slowly inside of her mouth. It smelled awful in there. I didn't care at the moment. My wife looked like shit, and all I could offer her was a cup of goddamn water. She choked on it. I grabbed a few tissues and cleaned around her mouth. I had the curiosity to peek inside of the bucket and noticed a red liquid mixed with everything else. I knew it was blood, a lot of it. How could it not be? But there were a lot more fluids combined with everything. After a long 6 hours of cleaning everything, the toilet, the bucket, the bathroom, the shower, my wife. I told my job I couldn't come in for a few days. My wife was sick. I got a bit of an attitude from my boss, but I didn't care. My wife was my importance. She was my priority. I loved her. Even with everything going on, she had not prayed today. I knew she was a Christian, so were her parents. She was born into it, raised with it. When I hadn't seen her put her hands together like she always did, even when sick, especially when sick. I didn't like that thought. I put her to bed after everything. She asked me, coughing like she was about to spit out her lungs, "Erica, could you get me something to eat?" My eyes widened a bit, the pure shock of that question. I'm not sure why it affected me so much, the thought of vomiting all that time. How could she even eat? But thinking about it, how could she not eat? Her body was probably the most fragile and weak that it's ever been. I agreed, told her I'd get her a bunch of different stuff. I went downstairs. We had a lot of leftovers because, well, we ordered a lot and didn't cook much. I brought her a box of half-finished pizza, mashed potatoes, a brunch leftover we did last Sunday, a few drinks, and a bunch of other things. She started eating them like her stomach was on the verge of eating itself. She chomped down on everything I had brought her. I didn't think of it much at first. In all honesty, I didn't know what to think. I was worried about her. I was just happy she was eating after that horrible morning. April 25-27th. She was in bed all those days. I called around families, friends, anyone who could potentially give some sort of explanation of what was going on. She was eating and eating. I had to order $200 worth of food for her, and only her. We only had 2 meals so far. I'm hungry too, but not as much as she is hungry. I've been texting my friend Tom. I've known him since we were kids. He's been as helpful as he could be. What could he really do? I let him know how she was, how things were, and what mostly was happening. I was tired. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her yell out to me she was hungry. I told her a few times that the delivery guy was a few minutes away. I was tired. I already said that I hadn't slept for a long time. 36 constant hours awake, blinking away from collapsing, hungry and worried. I hadn't even realized by then, but my eyes and body felt so heavy. It felt like tiredness was adding extra weight to my body, and then, without even realizing it, I woke up joltingly and looked around. It had only been 2 hours. It took me a good minute to remember what was going on, my wife, the food outside. Right. I got up and got the food at the door. It had piled up. I'm sure they were probably asking questions. It didn't matter. I picked it all up and brought it upstairs, keeping a few things for myself. I turned on the television and began eating. I had a bunch of fried stuff from everywhere. I just needed to eat something. I heard her upstairs eating, crunching, savoring, like she had never eaten before. I wasn't disgusted, but I was concerned about what I was hearing. How could this happen? Why was she like this? I shook it off and took a few bites of my food, until I realized something crucial. I had ordered fried fish. I must have ordered it without even realizing. I just picked a bunch of food. It didn't seem to matter to her. And I was tired. My wife is allergic to seafood. Anything that is fish, it could kill her. I dropped everything and ran upstairs, practically launching myself into the room. I even thought about breaking the door down. Thankfully, I didn't, but I entered the room, yelling at her to not eat anything. But she had eaten most of everything, including the seafood I had ordered. "William, shit, I'm so sorry, honey. I didn't realize I ordered fish. Where's your EpiPen?" I looked around frantically, everywhere, anywhere. And she looked up at me. Erica, what do you mean? I feel fine. It's been like 10 minutes, I feel fine. Really? William. What? What do you mean? I went up to her and looked at her. She did seem totally fine. The fish somehow hadn't affected her like it did back when we were younger. She had to go to the hospital for practically a week, needed help breathing and everything. I stayed in the room for another 5 minutes with her to make sure she was fine. I had the EpiPen ready, just in case. I don't know what was worse. The feeling that she was going to react at any point, or that she just continued eating. Chapter 2, Experiences. April 28th. I was downstairs texting Tom again. Even he was baffled. He was aware of her allergy. It says online that in a few rare cases, allergies can leave the body or with a lot of treatments and pills. Not the ones my wife had gotten, and she hadn't left the house. Hell, she had left the bed since she came back from the hospital. I was officially concerned about everything. I thought this would have gone away after yesterday, but after the fish incident, I'm not sure what to think, and I'm on high alert on everything. She asked me at first to get more seafood. She wanted to try it. I was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed. Maybe this was her way to actually get better. A very small part of me thought it would have been over after a few more days. I cooked up some of the salmon I bought and brought it up with her pills and some water. She barely waited for me to put the plate down and started eating. I thought she was about to bite into my hand. I was startled a bit, but I quickly put the pills to the desk with the water. William, don't forget to take your pills. Erica, right, yeah. My pills. I walked back downstairs. I had the EpiPen ready next to the drawer next to our bed, just in case. But I never needed it. I admit I crashed down onto the couch and fell asleep. All the sudden energy from last night with my sudden panic about what I let her eat boosted me up, and well, now it finally got to me. I'm not sure what had happened, but when I woke up to an awful chewing sound, crunching and chewing. It was night. I had slept for maybe 10 to 12 hours straight. I got up and walked to the kitchen. I turned on the light, seeing my wife eating the rest of the salmon that I had bought, except I hadn't cooked that one yet. Raw fish isn't exactly bad for you, sushi and such, but seeing it just in action, it felt haunting. This was the first time since that day that I had seen her out of bed. I was a bit relieved, but afraid to approach her. She looked up at me, chewing. God, I hated that noise. The disgusting gooey noises it made, the wild sadistic tearing of meat and other materials through her teeth. Erica, hey Will, sorry. I figured you fell asleep. I just got so hungry. I didn't want to bother you. I saw you on the couch and decided to get something. William, it's fine, Dash. How are you feeling? Erica, mostly hungry, but hey, I'm working on it. Sorry for making you overwork and everything. William, don't worry about it. It's just about making you feel better. I'm glad I can help. I forced a smile on my face. I'm not sure why. Why didn't I just smile? I was happy to make sure she was healthy. Erica, I'll stay here for a bit, grab a few more things, if that's okay. William, maybe actually you could comment with the eating? I'm spending a lot of money to give you so much food in so little time. I understand you can be hungry, but this isn't normal. Erica, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just in a hungry mood. I need food. William, then I'm taking it out of your account. I can't spend all this money on just food. Try to eat less too. I walked upstairs into our room a bit pissed. Before I started my ascend, I heard clicking from the kitchen. I looked back to see my wife, still eating. I brushed it off thinking it was just background noises and went up to our room. I expected it to be filthy, full of trash, when I entered though. The room was clean, only the best was filthy, and the room smelled like if you walked through an alley of dead animals. Where did all of the boxes ordered and bags gone to? I started taking off the sheets and put them in the washer. I used some Febreze to cover up the awful smell. I don't know how she lived in this room for 4 days now, just eating. As always, whilst waiting, I texted Tom, telling him about everything that had happened up until now. This time though, I actually called him. I needed to hear someone's voice, anything but the disgusting damn chewing and crunching I heard for the past days. William, hey man, sorry for suddenly calling, I'm not doing too good. Tom, no worries man. It's completely understandable. A lot of weird shit is happening on your end. How is she, by the way? William, I don't know. She seems physically and mentally fine, just eating so much. She took out the trash. She can get out of bed, just doesn't. The doctor told us to give it 3 weeks, but I kind of want to bring her back sooner. Tom, I'd say to call them, let them know what's going on. That you're worried for her and, well, from what you told me, you spent a lot of money and have not been earning much. How much longer can this go on? William, yeah, no, you're right. I'll call them, get an appointment, get this whole thing fixed, and add one more thing. Tom, what's up? William, I need a camera, like a nanny cam or something. April 30th. My friend Tom got me a camera to set up inside my house in the living room and in my bedroom. From time to time, I'd check to see my wife chomping down on the next food I had gotten for her. I didn't watch any longer than that. Reminds me that I tried getting her to the hospital today so that Tom could set up the cameras. She did not want to leave the house. The doctor had to come over on his day off. I apologized to him. He went to check out my wife, and he had somehow brought Erica outside long enough so that Tom could set them up. Afterwards, the doctor told me that she wasn't eating properly. She was losing weight. I chuckled sarcastically. William, are you fucking serious? All she's been doing is eating. I'm down $500 in food only for her, and you're telling me that she has not been gaining weight. Doctor, something she might be doing, not actually eating, maybe, or exercising when you sleep. The best thing you can do is keep helping her. Make sure she eats. William, she's in bed all day. She watches TV shows about cooking for God's sake. We talked for another 10 minutes. I had denied that Erica wasn't eating. She was eating. I know she was. My wife didn't exercise. She watched what she ate. She didn't eat too much or too little. She had a good metabolism. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. That night I even checked my suspicions. I had spent way more than $500. I had to stop spending so much, from whoever's account. This was an absurd amount of money to spend on food for 1 week. May 1st. She's eating again. I don't know what she was eating. Her hands were covered in a substance, but it was meat that I could smell, either expired or something else. I went to bed at around 8 p.m. last night. I slept on the couch. I thought I'd check the cameras, see what they picked up. I checked the live feed of her eating like she was a king, had food everywhere like I hadn't even cleaned the sheets. I had ordered her a few things again, not knowing what she had eaten yesterday. Kind of freaked me out. I made sure to order extra. I had made some breakfast for myself before doing so. I looked at my eggs and pushed the plate away. I couldn't bear the thought of eating. I reviewed the footage. Christ, I was almost thankful. I hadn't eaten my eggs. I would have thrown them up right after. At 9 p.m., she had gotten up from the bed, walked downstairs to me sleeping on the couch, and she just stared at me from the stairs. I sped up the footage, stared at me for 2 hours straight, not moving an inch. Her eyes darting me through the dark. After exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes, she suddenly moved to the kitchen. I couldn't see anything. I should have thought about putting one there, but I could see a tiny bit into the kitchen. She was looking through the fridge, anywhere that could have food. She couldn't find much canned food and such. Midnight, she was done with most of everything. Sauces were left, condiments, powdered products like soup and spices. A few minutes passed by of her gathering all of it. She couldn't possibly, right? As I thought, she couldn't do what I thought she was going to do. She did exactly that. She opened the lids and packets of all of them and chugged them. I couldn't see her face, but I could see her chest and her arms. I knew what she was doing. I closed the laptop immediately. I could hear the loud and horrifying gulps that were thudding inside her throat. I choked a bit, gagging. It took me a good hour to recover from what I had just seen and heard, but even then I was disturbed. I'll never forget it. I sent the footage to Tom. I wasn't crazy, and I needed someone to know what was happening to my wife, and I had to know what my wife was doing to herself, hopefully seeing why she was doing this. I took a breath and continued watching this cursed footage of a woman seeming like she was poisoning herself. From 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., she drank and ate cleaning products, charcoal, strong alcohol like it was nothing. The cooler that I had brought for the party, I hadn't emptied it, she did. Ate all the food in it, drank all the beers, alcohol, and even ate the weed I was going to bring. She didn't smoke it, she ate it. She desperately looked around for more things to eat. She went back upstairs. I switched cameras to saw her eating the bags that once held the food she ate. That's how she was getting rid of the boxes and bags. She wasn't taking the trash out. She was eating them. Plastic, cardboard boxes, paper. I could feel my heart race, pumping faster. I was panicking. What happened to No? What is wrong with her? After her feast, she stopped and looked down at the floor in a weird way, and I realized after a bit she was staring at me. Not at the camera, but me downstairs. She knew where I was. She knew exactly where I was at that moment. I knew she had watched me, but the sight of it felt like a hunter stalking its prey. I closed the laptop once again. I I didn't want to know what the hell was upstairs pretending to be my wife, pretending to be human. I could feel every hair on my body standing. I was on edge. I was scared, afraid. Every and any question was popping into my head, sending me into this crisis. I had to get a grip. I had to know this was real. I rubbed my hand with my fingers, feeling everything around me, my smells, my mouth, my touch. I started panicking even more, but then I saw a picture on our wall. Upon seeing it, I remembered a lot about my wife, everything that we've lived together. When I met her parents, how nervous I was. When I asked her to marry me, I breathed out like I hadn't sucked out air in forever. The relief, but then the sudden realization hit me even harder after. This was real. This is happening. I had to keep ordering food for it. Keep it at bay. Keep it here. Chapter 3. The Monster in My House. May 3rd. I went out yesterday. After all of that, I took an extra day, spoke with Tom about the situation. He told me to potentially get out of the house for a few days, in which I agreed. I didn't take anything with me. I took my phone, wallet, and keys and left the house. I went to my parents. I explained that I needed a break from Erica. I didn't tell them exactly what was going on, but I told them that I needed to see them. I can connect the cameras to my phone. I was afraid to check. But inside me I needed to. How far would this go? She could actually take this. After forcing myself to eat what my mother had made me, it wasn't bad. But thinking of eating only made me think of what I had seen my wife do to herself. I had a lot of water to force everything down my stomach. I looked at my phone and opened the surveillance app and looked. I almost dropped my phone on the floor. My face went white, my whole body froze. She was on the couch eating the fabric, tearing through the leather on the covers, the cotton inside. I could see the kitchen and it was ravaged. Everything was open, glass was shattered, the doors of the cabinets almost broken off their hinges. "William, what the fuck?" I whispered out, trying to cover my words. "Mom, what's wrong, dear?" I spaced out. I didn't even realize my mother was standing near me. I looked up at her, hiding my phone. "William, nothing." "Mom, sorry. Just Tom sending me a stupid photo." "Mom, oh I see, are you alright? You look tense. Do you want some iced tea?" "William, yeah, I'm fine. My job is just a tad stressful. Nothing I can't handle, I promise. But no thanks. I have to get going." I once again forced a smile on my face. I hated it. My own mother. I couldn't tell her what was going on. How could she understand? The video seems like enough evidence yet. No, I couldn't bring her into it. I had to take care of myself. Whatever that meant. I left the morning after, telling them thank you for taking care of me. But I had to talk this out, with Erica, of course, lying. I went to someone, hoping maybe someone had some answers, her brother. I asked him what had happened to their family, seeing if anything could relate to my current problem. Erica never talked about them. I only met them when I was younger, and they had died a few years before I married her. He was a bit hesitant at first, but he told me he didn't know much about what had happened either. "Ray, I wish I could tell you, but the cops only said that they disappeared, or missing, and to not hold out hope. Me and Erica just accepted it. Not much we could have done. Their house was emptied out. Nothing from the past or from now was found." "William, nothing was found?" "Ray, not a single object. It looked like an empty box, like a newly constructed house." "William, something wrong is going on with your sister, and I don't know what to do. I thought you might know what was happening." "Ray, wait, what? What do you mean? What's going on?" I thought about explaining, but even I had trouble believing me in my own words. So I showed Ray the footage, and he was taken aback. He was horrified, but he looked like it didn't affect him as much as it affected me. "Ray, our dad texted us too, saying that our mom would not stop eating. Whatever she got her hands on. He didn't have video, but we never believed him, or we thought he was talking crazy. We didn't think God. William, what do I do? What can I do for her?" "Ray, I'm not sure. This isn't normal. Can anyone even do this? Can anyone come out of this alive after ingesting all of that shit? Is it even Erica anymore?" I thought about it, how it could even be real. How could it even be her anymore? She had drunk cleaning products and looked as healthy as ever. That's not human, not anymore at least. "William, what do I do? I can't just leave her there. What if she eventually leaves the house? She's already tearing up the furniture." "Ray, I don't know, but if that thing was also responsible for my parents' death, and now somehow is infecting Erica, the best thing to do would be to try and kill it." I hated to say it, thinking it could still be my wife, but I agreed. This creature needed to be put down. It needed to be killed. I left the house, not wanting Ray to be a part of this. I took my car and left to a gun shop. I didn't own a gun, but I had a license. Never thought I would have had to use one. Especially the person I loved the most in life. I got a Glock 17, nothing too fancy, something quick. I headed home. I wondered what went wrong, what had happened to us, and what caused this. So many questions, and yet so little to no answers. I didn't even know if that thing eating my couch was my wife anymore, if it was even, I don't know what it was, and it insulted me by mimicking my wife, our memories together. I arrived at my driveway, and immediately knew something was wrong. I walked up to my door, and it was gone. I already had my weapon ready for whatever was waiting for me. I walked inside on edge. I aimed at every little noise or movement my ears and eyes could catch. I was nervous and scared. I didn't know if I had what it took to do it. The living room was cleaned out. And I don't mean the room was cleaned. It was empty, completely empty. Had she eaten everything? I walked into the kitchen. Same thing, all the cupboards were empty. The microwave had no more door. Everything that wasn't nailed down or could be removed easily was gone. I went upstairs, same thing. My bedroom was cleaned out. Not a single crumb of whatever that thing considered food was left. I think it didn't eat the house because it would have raised even more suspicions. The house looked like no one had ever lived here. Portraits, clocks, furniture, and the newly placed cameras too. Nothing. And the worst part, she wasn't there either. I ran outside in the backyard, and I heard the neighbor's kid screaming. I turned to look, seeing something that resembled my wife on all fours, biting down on the kid's arm, having it fully inside of her mouth, like it had no throat to cough on. Just a mouth. The thing looked like my wife, but its teeth had been broken, making them sharp. Its eyes were wide, like they hadn't slept. Its torso was mostly bones, at least of what I could see. It was dirty, dark, and expulsed by the most awful smell of rotting meat, waste. It itself was dead, yet it needed to eat. I was horrified, but I mustered the words, screaming at it, "William, let go of her." I shot at its leg and the bullet hit it, but it didn't puncture its skin. The bullet didn't go through. It just stopped, slowly being dragged inside of its body like it was eating it. This gun was useless. I put the gun back in my pants, and I ran over and hopped the fence, grabbed a wooden bat that was on the ground and grabbed it. I played a bit when I was younger. Let's say my swing was brutal. I swung at the thing's face, and it clunked, hitting full force, even breaking the bat. All three of us fell down. It let go of the girl's arm, and she ran off into her house calling out for her parents. I didn't really want to or have the time to think about why that had worked. I took the rest of the bat and plunged it into the chest of the thing. It screeched this unholy scream and kicked me off of it, absorbing the rest of the bat into its stomach. It sent me crashing into the fence, and I blacked out for a few minutes, and that's all it needed. I came back to the creature being gone, and the door of the house was gone. I stood up and went inside of the neighbor's house. It had been cleaned out or eaten out. William, God damn it. No. I crumbled to my knees knowing what it had done. I was about to give up until I heard that loud, disgusting clanking of teeth, tearing through material, gnawing into its stomach. It hadn't left the house. The noise it made, it never left me. I knew it was that monster, but what else could I try? Bullets didn't work, melee weapons either, but maybe like any other wild animal, any other savage beast. I stood up and ran to my car and opened the trunk, grabbing a fuel canister. I had it in an emergency just in case. We ran out of gas on the highway one day on vacation, and I made sure to always pack an extra in case. She always made fun of me by packing extra, just to be careful. I closed the trunk hard, staring at the gas can. I only had one way to light it. Chapter 4. My wife was eaten. I entered my neighbor's house and poured gas on every entrance, windows, every possible exit so it couldn't get out. But before I could reach outside, its long, disgusting hand grabbed me. Its fingers felt like knives slowly slicing into my skin. It threw me back inside into the wall. I looked up at it, and before I could take out my weapon, it pinned my left hand into the wall with its sharp finger. I squealed in pain and looked up at this greed creature. I still didn't understand. Why, how these hundreds of questions, these thoughts rushing into my head were suddenly silenced by my own voice as I spoke to it. William, what are you? What are you? Why were you pretending to be her? I know you're not her. I heard it quickly gasping and wheezing. It was laughing at me like the answer was obvious. I felt fear and rage growing inside of me. But it opened its mouth slowly in an unworldly way. In all directions its mouth started growing, expanding. I was looking at an abyss that I was going to become a part of it. Then the little girl suddenly stabbed the creature at the top of the head. I could see a sharp broken piece of wood sticking through inside its mouth. It yelped out and backed away. Looking at the girl, it screeched, shouting so loud it roared through the entire house, shattering the windows. In that quick instance, that sharp pain in my hand I felt when it nudged its claw out gave me the adrenaline rush, and I took out the gun from my pants and shot at the ground, igniting the fuel, and the thing turned its head back at me. I was somehow able to move out of the way. I ran for the kid and jumped out of the window. It hurt a bit, but nothing to what I had been through for the last week. I kept her safe, and so did her parents before dying of that monster. I told her to leave. I told her to get as far away. Anywhere but here. William, get out of here, kid, go. Get somewhere safe. She took off running on the sidewalk away from the house that had caught fire. I could hear it inside, screaming trying to get out. I turned around and walked away, hoping it was over. But the thing is smarter than I believed. It jumped out of the second floor window and crashed onto me. It was burnt, revealing its actual body. It was horrifying. I can't give much detail, but this thing, it spoke. I couldn't understand a thing. It spoke in tongues or another language. It kept me inside the house, knowing I wouldn't get out now. I had accepted my fate. It'll burn. They'll burn with it, but I had to try something. Couldn't let my life go out in vain. I could see inside its body through its mouth, like I saw before, a complete abyss. Nothing of light could be coming from deep inside of this bottomless pit. It grabbed me and I couldn't move whilst it forced me down its mouth. I probably bled out inside its stomach. The police and firefighters soon arrived. They had found the little girl and started putting out the fire. The house was finished, but not like there was anything worth it there. The thing was gone. There was nothing, no one but an empty burnt house. The police kept both houses on lockdown and even evacuated the neighborhood. Everyone there was asked to stay with family or friends. A few days into the investigation, they had apparently even found a few blood spots in the forest near William's house, all identified to be animals. They had also found half-eaten carcasses of raccoons, cats, dogs, whatever else you could find outside, even a deer. She was probably caught in the action. A few months had gone by, and nothing had happened more. Everyone was moved back into their house. A missing case was closed for William and Erica. Of course, to no avail. The case went cold. And 2 years later, still nothing. The house was rebuilt. New people have been moved into the houses. And I don't know if William is dead. I'm hoping. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm hoping for his sake that he is. God, please let him be dead. I don't want to know if he is. I think the thought of this story having its own ending, my ending, I guess I'm going to find out what happened to him soon anyway. It's been 2 years since this happened to my best friend, William. I've been the one writing this story. I've read his texts and reviewed his footage multiple times, police reports, and everything else that was given to me that I was able to access legally. I've also talked to Ray, Erica's brother, the little girl that survived, and the investigators that were on the case. My name is Tom Drumming, and I'm writing about what happened to my friend, William, because yesterday morning, my wife went to the hospital, and today I saw her on the toilet, and she's been there for almost an hour now. I can hear her vomiting. I never thought a simple vacation could go so wrong. In fact, when I planned this trip, I imagined nothing but peace. 2 nights away from the noise of everyday life, a chance to reset. I wasn't looking for adventure, and I definitely wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble has a way of finding you, especially when you least expect it. I booked an Airbnb in Hawaii, a quiet little house nestled deep in the jungle. Nothing fancy, just a simple retreat surrounded by nature. The listing had beautiful photos, warm lighting, wooden interiors, lush greenery outside the windows. It looked perfect, cozy, secluded, exactly what I needed. The host, a woman named Leilani, seemed friendly in her messages. She had tons of positive reviews, guests praising her hospitality and the house's charm. It all felt safe, normal. I needed this escape, a break from everything. I had no idea that stepping into that house would be stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. The first sign that something was off came before I even arrived. I received an email with the subject line, "Important, rules for your stay, must read." At first, I barely glanced at it. Every Airbnb has rules. Don't smoke, don't throw parties, clean up after yourself. I assumed this would be the same. But as I scrolled, my casual attitude faded. The list was long, strangely long, and some of the rules made no sense. Lock all doors at 9 p.m. sharp. Do not wait a second longer. If you hear any tapping or knocking between midnight and 3 a.m., do not answer. Do not open the door. Do not look out the window. If you wake up to any sensation of being watched, do not move. Wait until you no longer feel it. Do not turn on the porch light after sunset. If you find any object in the house that wasn't there when you arrived, do not touch it. Do not look directly at the carving. Email us immediately. Before leaving, sprinkle salt at the four corners of the house and never look back when you go. I stared at the list, rereading certain lines, trying to make sense of them. At first, I laughed. Maybe it was a joke. A weird local superstition? Some kind of tradition? The house was deep in the jungle, so maybe Leilani had reasons for these rules. Something about wildlife, burglars, or just keeping the place in order. It felt strange, sure, but harmless. I figured I'd follow them, if only out of respect. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? But then the night began, and everything changed. I arrived in the late afternoon, and the moment I stepped out of the car, I felt the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes you hesitate. Still, the house was beautiful, even more so than the pictures had shown. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, the open windows let in a warm breeze, and beyond them, the jungle whispered with the rustling of leaves. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. It was the kind of place that should have made me feel at ease. And at first it did. I unpacked slowly, placing my bag near the bed, my toiletries in the bathroom, my phone on the nightstand. Every movement felt strangely heavy, as if I were sinking into the house's stillness. For a while, I just stood in the center of the room, absorbing it. The weight of silence. The weight of being alone. It was different from the usual solitude I craved. It wasn't peace. It was something else. Then, as the sun began to dip beyond the trees, the feeling grew stronger. The air inside the house felt different, thicker, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, waiting. I glanced at the clock. 8:45 p.m. The rule came back to me suddenly, uninvited. Lock the doors at 9 p.m. sharp. Do not wait a second longer. I swallowed hard, shaking my head at my own nerves. It was just a precaution, right? Maybe the host had a reason. Wild animals, or maybe just overly cautious house rules. Either way, I wasn't about to test it. I double-checked the windows, shut the back door, and turned the lock on the front door at exactly 8:59 p.m. Settling onto the couch, I tried to shake the unease. Nothing had happened. Nothing would happen. I scrolled through my phone, let a movie play in the background, told myself I was just overthinking. And for a while it worked. The night passed without incident. Until I woke up to a sound that sent a chill straight through me. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks on the front door. Slow, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. My body locked up. If you hear any tapping or knocking between midnight and 3 a.m., do not answer. Do not open the door. The words from the email slammed into my head like an alarm. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay still. The knocking continued. Not frantic, not demanding. Just patient. Knock, knock, knock. A steady rhythm, like whoever, or whatever, stood on the other side knew I was awake. Knew I was listening. I turned my head ever so slightly toward the nightstand. My phone's screen glowed in the darkness. 12:42 a.m. I held my breath. And then silence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The air in the room felt wrong, like the quiet had thickened. My skin prickled, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to move. I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything at all. But I couldn't sleep after that. I lay there, stiff as a board, my mind cycling through possibilities. Was it really nothing? Some late-night visitor, lost in the jungle? A sick prank? My fingers itched to reach for my phone, to check the door, to look, but the rule stopped me. So I stayed there, frozen, listening to the silence. I didn't sleep again until the first light of morning. The second night, I woke up again, but this time, it wasn't a sound that pulled me from my sleep. It was a feeling that something was there. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. I could feel it, standing just inches from my bed, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to move, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was completely frozen, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the moment. The air around me was thick and unmoving, as if the entire room had been drained of life. The walls, the ceiling, the bed, everything felt distant, unreal. If you wake up to any sensation of being watched, do not move until it stops. The words from the rules echoed in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to obey. Seconds stretched into eternity. My fingers twitched, desperate to grab the blanket, to shield myself from whatever was there. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Then just like that, it was gone. The air shifted, like a weight lifting from my chest. I sucked in a breath, feeling control return to my limbs. My heart was still hammering, but I could move again. Shaky, unsteady, I forced myself out of bed. My legs felt weak, but I needed water. I needed to do something, anything, to break the tension. I made my way to the kitchen, gripping the counter for support. The coolness of the tile beneath my feet grounded me, made me feel human again. But as I passed the living room, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was something on the coffee table, a small wooden carving. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. The figure was of a man, his face twisted, hollow eyes staring, mouth stretched unnaturally wide, as if frozen in an eternal, silent scream. I knew, without a doubt, that it hadn't been there before. I had checked the house when I arrived. Every room, every shelf, every table. This hadn't been here. The rule came rushing back. If you find any object in the house that wasn't there when you arrived, do not touch it. Email us immediately. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone. My fingers fumbled over the screen as I typed a message to Leilani, my breath uneven. She replied almost instantly. Do not touch it. Leave the house. Come back after sunrise, and when you return, do not look at the carving. Throw a towel over it, take it outside, bury it deep in the ground after sunset. Don't ask questions. I didn't need convincing. The moment I read those words, I was out the door. I didn't care how ridiculous it felt. I just ran. I stayed away until the sun had fully risen. The jungle was eerily quiet when I returned, and my hands were still shaking as I pushed open the door. The carving was still there. I forced myself not to look at it directly. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, draped it over the figure, and lifted it with careful, trembling hands. Even through the fabric, it felt wrong. Too cold, too heavy for something so small. I walked deep into the jungle after sunset, my heart hammering with every step. The trees loomed high above me, their shadows stretching through the thick darkness. I dug a hole as fast as I could, shoved the carving into the earth, and covered it with trembling hands. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look back. I sprinted to the house, locking the door behind me. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my skin slick with sweat. I needed to sleep. I needed this night to be over. But no sooner had I gone to bed, grabbed a blanket, and prepared to sleep than I heard a whisper. It was so soft, so close, like a breath against my ear. Look at me. You must look at me, it said. A chill ran down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the blanket like a lifeline. The whispering continued, curling around me like smoke. Look at me, it continued. And then, stupidly, instinctively, I turned my head toward the sound. My breath caught in my throat. The carving was back. That was the moment I knew I had to leave. My entire body was screaming at me to run, to get out, to put as much distance between me and this cursed place as possible. My hands trembled as I stuffed my belongings into my bag, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't care about being quiet. I didn't care about anything except getting out. But then, the last rule. Before leaving, sprinkle salt at the four corners of the house, and never look back when you go. I hesitated, my mind racing. Did it even matter anymore? Would it make a difference? But I wasn't about to take chances. My hands were numb as I grabbed the salt from the kitchen counter and rushed to each corner of the house, scattering it with quick, jerky movements. My legs felt weak, my chest tight with fear. When I reached the front door, I exhaled sharply, gripping the handle. Just open it. Just step outside. I twisted the knob. Nothing. I tried again, harder this time. The door didn't move. A sharp jolt of panic shot through me. I yanked at it, my breath hitching as I threw my weight against the wood. It wouldn't budge. Then, I heard a sound behind me. A soft, almost delicate rustle. The hairs on my neck stood on end. Every part of me screamed, "Don't turn around." But I did, and there it was, the wooden carving, sitting in the middle of the floor, facing me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took a slow step backward, my mind trying to make sense of the impossible. I had buried it. I had followed the instructions. But now here it was, waiting, watching. Then the room shifted. The walls seemed to breathe, warping and twisting, the corners stretching in ways they shouldn't. My vision blurred as a heavy pressure settled over me, thick and suffocating. The air hummed, like something was waking up. And then, the carving moved. At first, just a twitch, a slow, deliberate tilt of its head. Then, its mouth opened wider, too wide, a gaping, unnatural void. And then a voice came from it. "You didn't follow the rule," it said. A cold hand clamped down on my shoulder. I couldn't move. The touch burned like ice, freezing me in place. My breath hitched, my body locked in terror. The door suddenly burst open, a rush of wind slamming against me. I tried to run. I lunged forward, desperate to escape, but something pulled me backward. The walls spun. The room twisted around me. My screams echoed, swallowed by the air itself. And then, darkness. I don't remember hitting the floor. I don't remember what happened next. I just woke up. Morning light poured through the windows, painting the house in soft gold. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. But the cold sweat on my skin, the racing of my heart, it was real. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my bags and bolted for the door. This time, it opened with ease. The jungle outside was quiet, the world peaceful again. But I didn't look back. Not once. Leilani never explained the rules. I never asked. And when I checked the Airbnb listing a few days later, it was gone. Like it had never existed. I wanted to forget. I needed to forget. But this morning, a new email appeared in my inbox. From Leilani. The house remembers you. It will call you back soon. I need help. My wife and I, both tired of the frantic pace of life back in the States, decided to move to Scotland 5 months ago. We found a small, weathered farmstead on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place you see in postcards, rolling hills, fog creeping through the valleys, a patch of forest across the road. Everything seemed perfect at first. The people in town were friendly enough, the kind that wave when you pass them on the road, but there's something off. It's not the kind of thing you notice right away. It's the subtle things, the long, drawn-out silences at night. The way the wind sounds different here, like it's carrying whispers. I didn't notice it immediately. I was busy settling in, working on repairs around the property, getting used to the rhythms of the land. But over time, something started to bother me. It crept in, like an itch you can't scratch, until it was too much to ignore. It started with the dreams. At first, they seemed harmless. Vivid, sure, but harmless. In each one, I was running through the thick, dark forest across the road. My heart would race, and the world around me would pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like the very ground beneath my feet was alive. But then the dreams came more often, night after night. Each time they grew more real, more urgent. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering in my chest, only to find myself lying in the same place I'd fallen asleep, the quiet of the house pressing in around me. One night, I had had enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something was watching. So I left the warmth of my bed, pulled on my jacket, and went out onto the porch, trying to shake the restless feeling. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't go back inside. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring across the road at the forest, the trees standing like silent sentinels in the moonlight. That's when I saw it, a shape, just beyond the edge of the trees. A shadow that didn't belong. I don't know why I didn't tell Shelley right away. Shelley's my wife, by the way. She already felt so out of place here, so far from home. She'd taken to humming lately, and I feel like it's a nervous tic for her. I didn't want to make things worse for her, especially when I wasn't even sure what I'd seen. At that moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, just the shadows playing tricks, the kind of thing anyone might mistake for a person out of the corner of their eye. But it wasn't like I could just dismiss it, either. I mean, the forest across the road isn't exactly close. There's a stretch of yard between the house and the trees, and whatever I'd seen wasn't standing out on the road. It was deeper, further in, beyond the line where the trees start to swallow up the light. I'd also been having those bad dreams. And how could I trust my own eyes when I was barely sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding? I didn't know what I had seen, but I didn't want to scare Shelley. Not when she already felt so displaced here. She might think I was losing it, but that was the way things were for a week or so. Pretty simple. Shelley and I settled into a routine. I worked from home, so my days were spent in front of a screen, responding to emails, writing reports, and the like. Shelley had inherited enough money that, as long as she kept some funds tucked away in index funds and didn't splurge on things we didn't need, we could live comfortably here. The farmstead was quiet, peaceful even. We had plans. We'd start small, make some repairs, and maybe get a few animals. The previous owners had goats and sheep, though the enclosures weren't in much better shape than the rest of the property. Most of the posts weren't even in the ground anymore, and a few of the stone fences were buckled and broken. I filled in the gaps where I could, but there was one spot, a stretch of old stone wall, that looked like it had been hit by a car. Still, the place was cheap. I had no complaints. The goal was early retirement, and we were on track. The slow, quiet life was exactly what we had envisioned. Then something happened to Blair. Blair was a nice enough girl, always smiling when she rode her red bicycle with the little basket in front, straight out of a movie. She lived a few properties down the road, and would pass by each afternoon on her way to work a shift at the local pub on the edge of town. She usually returned just past Shelley and I's bedtime, unless she got off early. We'd had our few nights out in town, chatted with her more than once. She was friendly, always waving and ringing her bike's bell as she pedaled by. It's a shame, really, what happened. I remember the last time I saw her. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been working on the gateway to the property when I saw her ride by, her bike against traffic. The bend in the road is wide enough that I never really questioned why she'd ride closest to our home before deciding to switch back to the proper side. She rang her bell, waved, and said hi without slowing down much. But then I saw something as she pedaled past, something over her shoulder, dangling from a branch. A little pendant made of twigs, twine, and a dried flower. It reminded me of my dreams. I don't know why, but I walked over and took it down. It wasn't even on my property, but it gave me the creeps. A sense of something not right, as if it radiated malice, though I couldn't explain why. That night, I was woken by a shriek, piercing, frantic, pulling me from sleep. My heart was racing. I bolted upright, my mind scrambled. I went to the kitchen, stepped toward the window, and looked out. There it was, the silhouette. I didn't go back to sleep. Blair didn't ride by the next afternoon, or the next, or the one after that. This didn't sit well with me for the following nights. Daytime felt fine, though it was the kind of fine where you just feel safer when the sun is up and the shadows haven't crept in yet. But eventually, the police showed up at our door, asking if we'd seen anything. That was the first time Shelley heard about my dreams, and also the first time I felt the sting of ridicule. The officers pointed and laughed as I told them about the shriek in my dream, how I woke up and saw the silhouette outside through the window. They didn't take me seriously. It sounded valid enough. Blair had lived alone in an apartment, and there was nothing to suggest foul play. She could have just packed up and left after her shift, the way some people do when they get the urge to start over. Aside from her boss doing a wellness check, no one else seemed overly concerned. With my suspicions brushed aside, Shelley seemed to relax. We decided to have a drink in Blair's memory, to toast our good neighbor who maybe, possibly, had just run away. I wish I hadn't drunk so much. By the time we got home, I was tipsy enough to stagger, and Shelley was far beyond that. I shouldn't have driven. But aside from my terrible parking job, no real harm was done. We stumbled into the house, too drunk to care about anything else, and fell asleep quickly. But in my dreams, things had changed. The pulsing now danced in red and blue at the edges of my vision, like neon lights flickering in time with my heart. This time, I wasn't in the forest. I walked toward it, from my own home. In the distance, a lute played, soft, lilting, and strange, carried on the wind. It wasn't the song itself, but the whistle that followed it, a tuneful, rhythmic whistle that drew me in, like a melody I should know. I reached the road, and that's when I heard it, a woman's giggle, light and playful. I crossed the street, shoving branches aside as I swayed into the forest. Even though I'd peered into it countless times, every time the light seemed to disappear the moment I got close, swallowed up by the trees. But not this time. The moonlight broke through the canopy, and it led me to a circle, a ring of small stones, moss, and mushrooms glowing faintly in the pale light. Inside the circle, a young woman danced, graceful, hypnotic. She seemed so familiar. Shelley? No, it wasn't her. But as I tried to focus on her, my vision blurred, and the figure was shrouded in shadow. And that's when I saw it. A bike. A red bike, just beyond the woman, leaning against a tree. The same red bike Blair had ridden. The same basket. And the same little bell. My heart pounded. I glanced back at the woman, and the instant my eyes met where hers would have been, something happened. Her neck snapped to an unnatural angle. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her wrists tilted in such a way that her fingers, her nails, pointed straight at me, like they were attack vectors ready to strike. The sound of a lute string snapping echoed in the dream, and that was when my body went into full prey mode. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. That was for less than a second. It felt like an eternity, though. I violently pivoted, my body sluggish, weighed down by the alcohol, before I lurched into a drunken sprint. The pulsing in my head grew, as if the rhythm were tearing through the soles of my feet. Thumping echoed behind me. Vibration. Branches cracking under the weight of something much bigger than I could imagine. This couldn't be Blair. No, that wasn't her. The figure in the forest, there's no way that was her. I crashed into trees, my shoulders scraping against rough bark. I hadn't wandered this deep into the forest. But I could see it now, the road, just a little further. The thumping grew louder, the air hot and foul, pressing against my back. My skin crawled. My heart hammered, feeling as though it might catch fire from the terror flooding through me. I reached the road, stumbled into the ditch, and collapsed. My knees buckled under me, and the drunkenness I had managed to escape during the sprint came rushing back in full force. I hit the ground face first. But I forced myself onto my back, panic driving me to scramble for some defense, to prepare myself for whatever was chasing me. And that's when I saw it. A little girl, in the treeline, stopped and stared right at me, next to something much larger. The thing I had seen before. But now, next to the girl, it was massive. Trollish. Ogreish. Dark, oppressive shadow cloaked them both. My heart stopped, and my vision blackened. And then I woke up. 6 a.m. What a terrible dream. Shelley still looked angelic, lying beside me, sound asleep. I rolled over, desperate to bury myself in the warmth of slumber, finally convinced that I was safe. But then I saw it. Mud. Tracked in through the door. I could see it from the kitchen all the way up to the bed. My boot prints. My boot prints? Pain shot through my shoulders and my knees ached. My back burned, stiff as a board. Grass stains on my palms. Dirt under my fingernails. Shelley woke up before I could finish cleaning the mess. It didn't take much for her to convince herself that I'd gotten too drunk the night before and stumbled outside before we went to bed. She scolded me, made me promise never to drive in that state again. I nodded, although I hadn't really been listening. Her reasoning seemed sound enough, that in my drunken stupor, I must have wandered outside, tracking in mud before collapsing into bed. And maybe she was right. I was well past buzzed, to say the least. But something gnawed at me as I patrolled the yard. The ground around the house was solid, dry except for the usual morning dew. We hadn't had any storms lately, no rain to soften the dirt into mud. I had reasonable doubt that whatever was smeared across the floor had come from our property. Then there was the gate. Just past the old iron gate at the front of our land, 2 clumps of upturned grass disrupted the otherwise undisturbed earth between the stone fence and the ditch, proof that I'd fallen there. I could picture it too clearly, staggering, breathless, tripping over my own feet, landing hard. But if that was true, how had I made it back inside? And why couldn't I remember getting up? Honey, the pie's ready, come back inside. What? Even looking back, I can't believe I was so lost in my own head that I hadn't noticed Shelley was baking. I couldn't even tell you how long I'd been pacing outside that day. Rhubarb and juniper pie. If you haven't had it, you should. Back in Pennsylvania, we rarely saw juniper berries in the markets. But here, they were everywhere, growing wild along the trails, sold fresh at every farmer's market. Shelley had taken to them quickly, experimenting in the kitchen, turning them into something sweet, something familiar. The pie didn't make me forget, but for a little while it grounded me. And really, wasn't everything fine? The house was warm. The days passed quietly. Aside from the nightmares, nothing had happened. I told myself that over and over. Shelley was happy. She came home from town in high spirits, chatting about little things, the baker's new scones, the neighbor's new dog. Meanwhile, I had been dampening our home's energy with my suspicions, with my paranoia. Maybe that was all it was, adjusting to a new place. Maybe the tension, the unease, the sense of something lurking. Maybe it was just me. The following days, no dreams, no strange noises, no Blair, just wonder. Wonder turned into dismissal, and dismissal turned me toward forgetting it all, until this week. My mood had lifted. The nights were silent. The house felt like ours again. I focused on finishing the stone fence out front, salvaging old rocks from a collapsed section of wall deeper in the property. The work was satisfying, almost meditative. With each stone I set in place, it felt like I was putting something behind me. Until I found it. I was wedging a large rock into the top of the fence when I heard another stone shift, a dry, scraping sound, just a few feet away. I paused. A loose stone, my natural prey. I nudged a few with my boot, and one moved too easily. Loose. Smiling to myself, proud of my manly blue-collar senses. Guys who work on computers can be handy too. I pried it free, ready to set it with fresh mortar. And there it was. A small pendant, nestled deep in a pocket between the stones. Twigs twisted together, bound in fraying twine. A dried flower, brittle and colorless, woven into the center. Not truly colorless, rowan, long past its bloom, a cream-white husk of what it had been. This wasn't lost or forgotten. Someone had placed it there. Hid it. The edges of the stone were too precise, too deliberate. I could see the raw scrape of metal against rock, pale and dustless. I knew this fence. I had been working on it all day. Nothing kept the weather out, not the damp, not the wind. And yet, the hollow where the pendant rested was fresh. If it had been there long, rain and time would have taken their toll. It should have been blackened with rot, disintegrating into the dirt. It wasn't. I reached in. The moment my fingers touched it, the air shifted. A gust of wind swept through. Not a natural breeze, but a single, deliberate push of air that curled around me, lifting the fine hairs on my arms. I froze. There, riding on the wind, was a sound. A whistle. High and thin, almost tuneful, deliberate. Too deliberate. It didn't come from the trees or the distant road. It came from nowhere. From everywhere. Something inside me recoiled. My gut tightened like I'd swallowed ice water. Then, just as fast, my fear burned away, smothered under something hotter. Anger. I was tired of this. Tired of the tricks, the whispers in the dark, the things just outside my sight line. Whatever game this was, I was done playing. I didn't take it inside. I wouldn't. Instead, I carried it far out back and threw it, hard, into the underbrush. Let the woods have it. Let whoever put it there come and get it. I could even feel like they were watching. The hairs on the back of my neck raising, just for me to pat them back down. I dusted off my hands, turned toward the road, and started walking. I was going to our neighbor's house. I needed answers. By the time I reached the Aikens property, the sun was leaping from its peak, pressing heat into my shoulders, soon to set. Stuart and Elsie were always welcoming. They'd hosted Shelley and me once together, then Shelley plenty more times on her own. My visit was met with the usual warmth, right up until I asked about the Fultons. Which, honestly, wasn't long past our greetings. I'd planned to ease into it, to start slow and ramp up the questioning, so I wouldn't sound insane. But the moment I mentioned the last family to own my house, the atmosphere shifted. Subtle but undeniable. Stuart and Elsie stiffened, their easy smiles tightening. "Well, what do you need to know about them?" Stuart said. "They aren't coming back." "What? What?" Elsie shot him a look, then quickly softened her voice. "What Stuart means is, well, there's not much of a legacy to them. And they shouldn't concern you. Not reassuring. Not even close." I pressed. "What's that supposed to mean? Are they?" "Yes." Stuart cut in, then hesitated. "Kind of. Wah. Isla's been missing. Alexander is most definitely dead." Something heavy settled in my gut. My thoughts scrambled to piece together questions faster than I could ask them. Stuart must have seen it on my face because he exhaled and continued before I could interrupt. "Alex and Isla were good neighbors. A little odd, but happy. Moved in 7 years ago, no fuss. Always friendly. Isla especially. She used to stop by often." His voice softened for a second, like the memory was bittersweet. "Things only got strange in the months before Isla disappeared." Elsie folded her hands in her lap. Neither of them looked at me now. "She told us Alex wasn't sleeping," Stuart went on. "Not just trouble sleeping, wasn't sleeping at all. Some nights she'd wake up, and he was gone. But he always went to bed with her. Always woke up beside her. She thought maybe he was sneaking out, because of money trouble. She never got an answer." He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the table, thoughtful. "The week she stopped coming around," he said, "the police visits started." My mouth was dry. "Alex was clean," Stuart said. "Not a single person believed he hurt her. You have to understand, he wouldn't. They weren't just some new couple who moved in. They grew up here. Childhood sweethearts. That house was their first home together." Stuart exhaled sharply, then stood and walked to the far window. He pulled back the curtain, revealing a small, familiar shape tucked on the sill. A pendant. Twigs, twine, and a dried rowan flower. The same damn thing I found in my fence. "Wards," Stuart said. He picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. "Alex gave us a bunch of them. Told us to tuck them around our homes. Said the forest took Isla. Said it took his wife. And before he left, he told us to keep the wards up." My skin prickled. "Left?" I asked. Stuart's fingers went still against the twine. He said he was going to get her. He placed the ward back on the sill, then crossed the room to another window. This time, he pulled the curtain back and gestured outside. "Last time we saw him," he said, nodding toward the bend in the road near my house, was that night. I stepped closer and followed his gaze. A couple 100 yards away, just past the curve, lay the treeline. The forest's edge, dark even now, with the noon sun glaring overhead. The wind barely stirred the branches. It was clear that night, Stuart continued, voice quieter now. No moon, no clouds, just stars. He exhaled through his nose. We watched him walk in right there, lantern in hand. Never saw him come back out. Something inside me sank. They found him the next week, Stuart finally said. His parents went to check on him. Guessed through everything, he'd never missed his Wednesday call with his ma. He let out a slow, weighted breath. Coroner said heart attack, but he was in his bed. On his side of the bed, looking up at the ceiling, arms at his sides. Fully dressed. Mud on his boots. I swallowed. We keep the wards up, Stuart said, voice low. He looked down at the one in his palm, frowning. Just in case. Stuart opened his mouth to say more, but I cut him off. I shouldn't have even let him speak as long as he had. Not after realizing what I'd done. What I'd taken down. The wards. They had been separating my house. My wife. From whatever was in the forest. My stomach clenched. I need to leave. Now. Please, can I have one of those wards? Elsie looked like she was about to protest, lips parting with the kind of words people say to reassure themselves more than anyone else. That I wouldn't need it. That Alex had lost his mind. That it was just a story, just superstition. But Stuart knew. He raised a hand, silencing her before a single syllable could escape. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way his gaze lingered on me. A weight, a quiet understanding, like he had been waiting for this. With a small nod of his head, he gestured toward a drawer. Elsie hesitated, then opened it. Inside, lying in a thin layer of dust, were 3 more of those brittle little charms. Twigs bound in knotted twine, flowers long dead. They must have been sitting, forgotten yet deliberately kept. I didn't wait. I grabbed them and turned for the door, my pulse a dull roar in my ears. I had to get home. I had to get them back up. Before sunset. As I stepped off the porch, I heard it. The soft, deliberate click of the Aikens' door latching shut. And then the lock turning. I must have looked like a madman, sprinting straight for the house. I didn't care. I needed time. As much as I could steal before the light bled from the sky and darkness took its place. Cutting through the yard, my breath ragged, I caught movement, a figure in the window. Shelley. She passed by the bedroom window upstairs, the soft glow of the lamp outlining her familiar shape as the sun began to lower itself beneath the other side of our home. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly stumbled. She was safe. Here. Home. Unaware of the wards I had torn down. Unaware of what I had let in. But relief was fleeting. Urgency took its place. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I barreled through the front door, barely remembering to close it behind me before rushing to the windows. One by one, I placed the wards, my hands shaking as I set them on the sills. They felt too small, too fragile. Would they even be enough? Above me, Shelley moved across the floorboards, the creak of her steps steady and light, humming a tune I almost recognized. Familiar, reassuring. But there was one more ward. I had to find it. Without stopping to catch my breath, I tore back outside, the last remnants of daylight stretching long and thin over the grass. The sun was almost gone. I ran. To the back. To where I had thrown it. I found it faster than I expected, almost as if it had been waiting for me. Snatching it from the grass, I didn't hesitate. I sprinted back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sky had darkened just that much more, shadows stretching and swallowing the last light. I nearly slammed into the front door as I stumbled inside and closed it behind me, heart still pounding. I recouped for 30 seconds or so, catching my breath. And then the handle turned. The front door creaked open a few moments later, and there was Shelley, standing in the doorway, holding a little woven basket full of juniper berries. Her face was flushed from the cold, strands of hair falling loose around her cheeks. I shoved the ward into my pocket, forcing my breath to steady. She giggled. "Well, what had you running like that, you goof?" Her smile was warm, teasing. "Couldn't even hold the door for your wife." I blinked. She wasn't home. "I thought you'd been inside," I said quickly, covering the rush of unease creeping up my spine. "That's my bad, darling." I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in the warmth of her neck, breathing her in. She smelled earthy, crisp, with the faint bite of juniper. She leaned back slightly, brushing her fingers through my hair. "I told you I was going out to pick berries today. Didn't I do good?" Her voice was soft, sweet, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. I had heard her. Upstairs. Humming. Walking. Moving through the house. I swallowed hard, tightening my arms around her just a little. You did so good, honey. I forced myself to let go. Forced myself to act normal. Be right back, I murmured, stepping away. I slipped around the corner, pulling the ward from my pocket. Like a burglar, I crept up the stairs, my pulse in my throat, holding the ward out in front of me like some kind of idiot. I swept each room as if I were clearing a house in a war zone. Nothing. Closet clear. Bathroom clear. Hallway clear. My muscles loosened, but only slightly. Then from downstairs, "Honey, are you done hiding from your wife now?" Her voice was sing-song, playful. I exhaled, forcing the tension from my body. "Yes, I am." I ducked into our bedroom, knelt down, and slipped the final ward under the bed, right beneath her side. Extra protection. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. We curled up together on the couch, watching Bob's Burgers while the rich, earthy scent of juniper pie filled the house. That should have been the end of it, but I wouldn't be writing this now if not for the dream. It started with me waking up, sitting straight up in bed. The sheets beside me were cold. Empty. A giggle drifted through the room, soft, familiar, wrong. My head snapped toward the door, just in time to see Shelley's bare feet disappear around the frame. Jolted, I threw the covers off and followed. The wooden floor was cold against my feet as I stepped into the hall, catching the faintest sound. Bare feet slapping softly against the stairs. She was heading down. I reached the landing just as the front door groaned open. I rushed to pull my shoes on, the laces tangling under trembling fingers. When I finally looked up, she was already outside, skipping, dancing, drifting, straight toward the trees. The moment I crossed the threshold, the dream shifted. The moonlight dimmed. The sky felt too low. My vision tunneled, narrowing toward the trees as though the house behind me no longer existed. The closer I got to the woods, the louder her humming became. And then the lute, a melody, plucked softly from the shadows, rising to meet her song. I stepped past the brush, and there it was. A small ring of stones, moss, and mushrooms glowing faintly in the pale light. My stomach turned to ice. At its center sat a juniper shrub, half-picked clean. A string on the lute snapped with a sharp, jarring twang, and I woke up, next to no one. The bed was empty. The house was silent. I rushed downstairs, my pulse still hammering from the dream. And there on the kitchen table was a note. Went to drop off the pie at Stu and Elsie's. I'll be back around noon, baby. Signed, Shelley. That's not right. That's not right. She doesn't spell her name like that. A slow, creeping chill spread through my chest. I turned the paper over in my hands, searching for anything else, something to explain why my skin was crawling. But the handwriting was perfect. Too perfect. Like it was trying to be natural. Trying to be her. I swallowed hard and turned on my heel, bolting back up the stairs. I dropped onto my hands and knees beside the bed, heart in my throat. I lifted the bed skirt. The ward was gone. A sharp wave of nausea rolled through me. My mouth was dry, my hands clammy as I pressed my palm to the floorboards, scanning for something, anything. And then I saw it. Faint, nearly invisible against the wood. The smallest outline of a footprint. Dry mud, barely more than a smudge, as if someone had carefully wiped it away. Almost perfectly. She almost had me. It's 10 a.m. right now. I need ideas, guys. What do I do? Okay, before anyone here calls me crazy, or starts trying to use WebMD or the DSM to diagnose me with a mental illness, let me explain myself. I think most of us had an imaginary friend when we were younger. Whether you remember it well, or just in passing, you probably had an imaginary friend in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it was a stuffed animal that you personified, or maybe it was just the voice in your head that kept you company. For me, it was the latter. Growing up, I was an only child. Combo that with the fact that I was homeschooled until high school. It probably isn't surprising to hear that I didn't exactly have many real friends. To be honest, my social circle consisted of my mom, my dad, and my grandmother, who was in charge of my homeschooling while my parents worked. Don't get me wrong, even without friends my own age or people to hang out with, I wasn't an unhappy kid. In fact, I think I had a pretty good childhood. My grandmother says I had a pretty active imagination as a kid, and it delighted her to see how well I could keep myself entertained. Maybe I should introduce my imaginary friend. I called him Co. I can't remember if that's what he told me to call him, or if I came up with it, but that's his name. I'm not sure exactly when Ko came into my life, but he was there with me through everything. Through the good and the bad times in my life, Ko was there. During homeschooling, my grandmother would even make lesson plans to include Ko, setting up assignments for him to complete and giving him questions to answer, which he always got right. Whatever we did, Grandma would always find a way to include Ko. I want to make one thing clear. I never saw Ko. I didn't know what he looked like, or if he looked like anything, but I could hear him. Not audibly hear him, but like the voice in my head kind of hear him. You know how you can hear what you sound like in your thoughts? Imagine that, but a totally separate voice, distinct from your own thoughts, ringing in your head. I knew Grandma couldn't hear Ko. The same way my parents couldn't hear Ko. If Ko wanted to say something to my parents or my grandmother, he told me what he wanted to say, and I communicated it for him. That meant that when Ko was participating in class, I was answering the questions on his behalf. Like I said a little earlier, Ko never got an answer wrong during class. I wasn't a dumb kid by any means. In fact, I think I was quite smart for my age, but Ko knew answers to questions I'd never have a reason to know. I think whenever I answered those questions right, speaking for Ko, my grandmother just assumed I'd been studying, or that I was like one of those genius kids. I'm sure you're wondering exactly why I'm bringing any of this up. If Ko isn't imaginary, it sounds like I've got the perfect cheat sheet to life, right? I could use him to pass any test, nail any interview, and overall better my life, right? Well, for a long time that's exactly what I did. Except Ko didn't just guide me through the academic portions of my life. He gave me answers for every part of my life. For all the skeptics still reading, I'm sure you've already rationally explained this as the overactive mind of a lonely child. Clearly, I actually knew the answers to any of the questions my grandmother put on a test. That I was using my imagination to solve my childhood and adolescent problems, coming up with the solutions myself, and using my inner thoughts as a springboard. I can't blame you for believing that. Even typing this now, I realize how absolutely insane this all sounds. I've typed and retyped some parts of this so many times, wondering if this is even worth posting about, or if anyone would take it seriously. Ko says I shouldn't, and for the first time in the memory of my life, I'm about to do the opposite of what Ko tells me. Yup, my not-so-imaginary friend Ko is still with me. Even as I write this now, I can hear him in my head, screaming at me to stop. That I'm making a mistake. That no one will believe me. But I can't help but wonder. Why does Ko not want anyone to know he exists? That he really exists, I mean. Ko won't answer that question, and when I ask, his response is a simple, pleading request. You just need to trust me. I've spent my entire life, all 27 years of it, trusting Ko. Listening to everything Ko tells me to do, and I have to admit, I think my life is better because of it. I graduated top of my class, both in high school and in college. I landed a comfy job, have a comfy life, and even have a lovely wife who is expecting our first child. Every single good thing that has come to me has been with Ko's help, following his instructions. I applied to the college he told me to. Applied for the job he told me to. Married and fell in love with the girl he told me to. As I type this now, admitting it to myself in a tangible way, I wonder if I ever had any agency in my own life, and the thought that I didn't terrifies me. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering why I'd care. I just said that I'm living a dream life listening to Ko, so why would I want to change anything? Why would it bother me that I don't have traditional free will if my life is perfect? Why would I even think about it? I mentioned earlier that my wife is expecting. She's far enough along now that she learned it was a boy. Ko had already told me that it would be, despite me asking him not to tell me early, but I still feigned excitement for her sake. When we got pregnant, my wife and I decided to save the discussion of names for after we knew the gender. After finding out officially yesterday that we were having a boy, we spent all of last night trying to come up with names. I was practically no help, because Ko was flooding my mind with only one name. Ko. I tired to hold back. Something about naming my son after my imaginary friend just didn't sit right with me. But Ko was persistent. More persistent than he'd ever been about anything before in my life. It was like I'd never had a choice as the name left my mouth. For the first time, while following Ko's suggestions, I felt like something was wrong. My wife smiled and told me she liked that name. I smiled too, but behind that smile a seed of doubt had now been planted. Doubt about every facet of my life that Ko had directed. I began to wonder if Ko's suggestions were ever really suggestions. If I ever had any choice in the matter when Ko told me to do something. Ko tried to wash away my worries, telling me that if I just kept listening to him, my life would always be perfect. But I need to know how much control I have now. I need to know that I have control over my own life, because as crazy as it sounds, I'm not so sure that I do. That's why I'm writing and posting this. I guess this is kind of like a test to see if I really can resist Co. To see if I have any agency over my own actions. I want to know exactly how much free will I have, so I'm posting it here. I don't think I have to worry about anyone I know personally coming across it. Even if they did, the only people that would potentially know who I am based off the information given are my parents and my grandmother, and I'm pretty sure none of them use Reddit. So that's about it, I guess. Thank you all for being my springboard and my confidant. If I have any updates after this, I'll give them, but I'm not exactly sure what I'd update with. I was thinking of maybe visiting my grandmother. She's in hospice care now in her very old age, but she's still cognizant. I wanted to ask her if she remembered anything in particular about my childhood that seemed weird or different, or if she remembers anything in particular about Co. Co hates the idea, but that only makes me want to do it more. I think Co has resigned himself to the fact that I am going to post this, whether he wants me to or not. For the last few paragraphs, he's been pretty quiet, but I can't get the last thing he said to me out of my head. You will regret this. Well, I suppose I'll find out. Horror fiction. On a nice calm Sunday drive in his black Toyota, a man by the name of Jake Michaels gets a flat due to a nail in the road. Asterisk, God damn it, says Jake as he kicks the tire. Frustrated with circumstances that have just arisen spontaneously, he got his car to the nearest mechanic shop. The mechanic was a man with a short black beard, deceiving hairline, wearing a baseball cap. As he looks at the car, he turns to Jake. Gonna be a couple hundred, he says to Jake. Jake is shocked. He doesn't have the money, nor does he have car insurance given the prices. Shit, I don't have that kind of cash. Is there any sort of plan we could set up? The mechanic shakes his head. He thinks for a moment and says, Listen, I know a man who would be willing to get it fixed, if you're willing to do a little work. Jake nods his head. The mechanic drives him to a local butcher's shop. The butcher's shop was owned by a man named Richard Fleischman, an older gentleman. He has white beard, bald head, wearing a white shirt with an apron over him. He was holding a cleaver. Jake and the mechanic walk into the shop, the door making a ding once they open it. It was small with a back room and all the things you'd expect in a butcher's shop. Hey Rich, the mechanic waves at Richard. Richard smiles and waves back. Ah, how are you, good friend? Richard says in a kind way. I'm good, listen, my friend here. He unfortunately got a flat. He was wondering if you'd need some help. Ah, of course, mister. Richard looks at Jake, pausing, waiting for him to say it. Jake Michaels, sir. Richard smiles and leads him back. Richard grabs a broom and mop. All right, Jake, here's what I want you today. I want you to wash the entire place from top to bottom. And I'd pay to have your car fixed. He hands him the mop and broom. All right, sounds simple enough, Richard. S face turns serious for a moment. But there's one rule you must never break. Don't you dare. Go into that door. Richard points to a locked door, and Jake knows it's locked because instead of a regular door lock there's pads and chains. Why yes sir, Jake stuttered confusedly. Richard smiles again, but this time there was something off about it. Well, have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Asterisk, he walks out of the place. That night Jake was doing his routine, cleaning the kitchen, the store part, all of that stuff. But as he is cleaning he sees the door. Compelled, he takes the keys and opens the padlock. He opens the door. Inside was something he never thought could be in there. Thousands of sliced up bodies. Some with their body parts removed, some with their chest open. It was a sight. He begins to hear a voice behind him. I told you not to. It was Richard sounding angry. He stares menacingly as Jake begins to scream. Richards has a syringe and tries to stab Jake with it. Given Jake is younger and stronger than Richard, he was able to fight him off. But not for long. Richard gets on top of him and manages to inject Jake. Jake slowly but surely loses consciousness. After that night, no one has seen Jake or even heard from him. The butcher somehow got a supply of fresh new meat. No one knew exactly where it came from. One day the mechanic came back to the shop. He had a man with a bun, black glasses, a goatee eye. Hey Rich, this man has a car he needs fixed but has no way to do so. Richard grins. Oh, I know a way for him to pay his bill. This is not how I intended to retire from the force. Do you know that feeling? When you did everything right except for the very last thing, and then it leaves that indelible stain on something that could have been impeccable. This is exactly how I feel, even after all these years. But if there is a greater sentiment in my heart, then it is certainly my gratitude for being alive to tell you this story. Sylvie is the name, or SYLV like my former colleagues still call me to this day. I have been in the police from 1985 to 2008, went from dispatch officer to detective in 1991, and remained one until my forced retirement. I was never interested in climbing up the ranks. Instead, I wanted to be where I could bring the maximum value. I believed it to be investigations and was recognized for being good at solving missing persons cases. After 21 years of service, I started to feel a little old and rusty and wanted to shift my attention on another passion of mine, baking. I think I should have listened to that feeling. Why did not I listen? Because every time I was very close to do so, there was a case that needed to be solved, and I could not just let it go. I had to help the persons and the families involved. The Firefly cases then started in 2007. A string of disappearances so puzzling, inexplicable, and frustrating that I started experiencing hair loss the more I investigated. It was always the same modus operandi. A child is out for whatever reason, at least most of the time, sees a light, apparently a firefly, follows it to a very quiet area with no prying eyes, and just vanishes. Whoever sick psycho that was doing it had to be aware of the cameras all throughout the city, because the vanishing part always occurred in a dead angle that the device could not cover. Be it for taunting or another reason, there was always one item belonging to the victim left on the scene. If only we could get all the right answers. The first case brought to our table was that of little Marjorie. The 8-year-old girl was last seen walking home from school, since the two locations were less than 800 meters apart. On a camera mounted to a street pole, something resembling a firefly can be seen emerging from a small bush, gain the attention of the little girl by flying around and way above her in circles, and then lead her to an adjacent, quieter alley with no cameras. The only thing she left behind was her right shoe. Another case, not the second, was that of little Spencer, out with his parents at a restaurant. We do not know how or when he noticed the firefly, but at some point, the 11-year-old can be seen following it to the toilets of the establishment, and he was never found to this day. He left his baseball cap behind. The most frightening case was that of little Harrison. No child is safe anywhere anymore. The 8-year-old boy lived with his parents in their CCTV-monitored house in an upscale neighborhood. The firefly can be seen gaining the attention of the boy late at night and through his window by bumping into it. The boy then pushed the curtain aside, curious about the noise, then opened the window, curious about the light, and let it in. He was never seen again, and left only one button of his pajamas behind. The more we approached 2008, the more the responsibles struggled to contain themselves, and the cases became terrifyingly frequent. We started a whole campaign advising parents and kids themselves as well to avoid following fireflies, or anything that resembles a little light. We also had officers constantly patrolling areas to ensure maximum safety. It worked with the parents as they became stricter, but not really with the children as the disappearances continued. The most disturbing and mind-bending case came afterwards. 3 kids were last seen playing in a park near their neighboring houses. On one of the cameras in the park, for the first time, we could see the arrival of the light on the scene. Its flight was very precise and intentional, like a small drone. It was not flashing or flickering, and it entered one of the attraction for children that was a fairy little house. It stayed there until the children were close enough, then revealed itself, flying and flashing like a firefly. You could see the kids struggling in their minds about making the right decision, but I guess the promise of a magical adventure is far too tempting for our little ones. Probably placing their confidence in their number, the 3 children followed the little light in the house. It had little windows that allowed us investigators to have a glimpse of what occurred inside. The light seemingly grew brighter after a few seconds, and my heart sank when I saw the house shaking, as if they put an actual fight for their lives when they realized that it was a trap. Then everything stopped. That was it. 3 kids at once. 6-year-old Betty, 7-year-old Maria, and 9-year-old Jennifer, leaving behind a bracelet, an earring, and a butterfly-shaped hairpin, respectively. Rage and uproar overcame the town. We had vigilante groups forming, and people accusing others of being the culprits and being involved in human trafficking and terrorism. We had countless calls pouring in every single day that of course did not lead anywhere. I was put under more pressure than anyone else in the service because of the record that I had for solving missing persons cases, and it seemed that the entire burden of the Firefly mystery rested on my shoulders. Several theories involving the supernatural emerged, but I was not one to entertain such crap. It had to be one or several persons using some very elaborate things. We just had to bring all the right pieces together. So of course, I did some digging and learned that the same thing was happening in a few other towns as well. But the cases were seemingly swept under the carpet to avoid a rather justified national hysteria. Children were disappearing. I always told myself that as a woman, a mother, and a human being, I was ready to shine maximum light on those cases to raise awareness. I tried contacting the colleagues who worked on the cases in other towns, but received puzzling responses from them. Honestly, it was as if they did not care or they were instructed not to say much. Enraged by their reactions to the cases, I investigated them, convinced that they all could be involved and that they could lead me to answers. I discovered something. Most if not all of those colleagues were approached by shady people who somehow managed to dissuade them from pursuing investigations and just put everything on hush. Meanwhile, the bastards grew more confident, taking children away, and if it was not happening in our town, it was happening elsewhere. My husband Albert and I grew so paranoid that we put bars on every window and door, and they were usually closed at all times just to protect our two boys. We were scared of all kinds of lights, especially if it was small and very bright. Soon enough, the shady people approached my colleagues and I, me in particular, each of us in our own respective homes. No, they were not dressed in black suites with sunglasses and all that, but I could still read government written all over them. My husband told it to me later, but while two of them were trying to coerce me to let them contain the threat, as they called it, themselves, a third agent was standing behind the two others, arms crossed, staring at him, with one of her fingers twitching. It was a secret message in Morse code. Being a former Boy Scout, getting the message was a piece of cake for my husband, though it was very unclear at first. Watch till you six it. Until I see what? And watch out for what exactly? My husband thought. Was he supposed to pick up anything subtle while they were in our house? Everything started to become too dangerous, and Albert was even thinking about relocating in another continent just to be on the safe side. Literal threats in our home. Government involvement? Psychos abducting kids, and watch till you see it. Should we just keep an eye open on the cases until we see something? So many questions, so many stress. My health and our life quality were declining. One day, I decided to watch one of the surveillance tapes, and this is when it hit me. The message was for me and all the other investigators, at least, those who decided to ignore the threats. Honestly, what was there to watch other than the tapes? So I re-watched them, again and again, without finding a single clue. I did not let the frustration get to me. Maybe the agent meant watching entire tapes instead of the shorter versions we got from the investigations, which could be several days long depending on the capacity of the surveillance equipment used. I decided to give it a shot. Most of the recordings were erased by the different maintenance crews because they considered that we already got what we needed. However, miracles happen, and for the cases I mentioned earlier, the full tapes, if I can call them as such, were still available. It took time, it took long, but we discovered something. Something even stranger. On the scene of each disappearance, after many hours and even days in some cases, an animal would emerge, without it first arriving there prior to the events. The same way it did not make sense for those kids to disappear at those places, it did not make sense for those animals to appear there. In the case of little Marjorie, a rabbit was seen emerging from the alley hours later at night and leaving the scene. For little Spencer, they kept the recordings because something extraordinary happened, but they never thought it could be useful for the investigations, so they never brought it up. A snake, a freaking snake, could be seen emerging from the restroom area after about 2 days, and during the night when the restaurant is closed, and just disappear out of view at a dead angle. The employees said that they never encountered it in the facility or even outside, but they cannot really tell how it got in or out. For little Harrison, as his distraught mother kept hope, leaving the door and the windows of his room open day in and day out, a light could be seen from a window after a few days, glowing out of the blue at 1:46 a.m. and for about 4 seconds. Afterwards, a black bird, probably a raven, just flew out from the same window. She never brought it up to us. In fact, she never checked, never knew, and just kept waiting. She still is. For little Betty, Maria, and Jennifer, a husky dog emerged from the fairy house after a strange light shone inside, hours after the girls had vanished. I still remember its piercing eyes as it looked directly at the camera. It felt like looking into my soul. It was disturbing. The colleagues started again with the supernatural crap, with the outlandish theory that the light was turning the children into animals. Give me a break, come on. Are you kidding me? It was rather quickly debunked because in the case of the three little girls, Betty, Maria, and Jennifer, only one animal emerged, one instead of three. It hurt me to think that, but I wanted to be on the scene of the next one. I knew it meant one more child disappearing, but I had to investigate and find some much-needed answers. It happened on November the 23rd, 2008. This is certainly the day I knew that it was it for me. I had to retire and let it go somehow. I am still very ashamed, but I had to. A distressed father called the emergency number in absolute panic, saying that a thing was trying to take his daughter from him, and both were hiding somewhere in an abandoned factory. By the time we got there, it was too late. Apparently, both of them were living there because the father was paid to guard the premises. We found him with the entire left side of his torso bitten off and missing. The coroner said he could not believe his eyes because the bite marks resembled that of an animal that is no longer around in our era, and saying its name would label him as crazy and send him to an asylum and an early retirement. We traced the little footsteps of Heather, the 7-year-old little girl, through the snow and to the back of the factory where they abruptly stopped. The government guys also showed up, taking charge immediately before the arrival of the press and reinforcing my will to uncover the truth. They threatened and almost chased everyone away at some point. But the most revolting thing, according to me, was that for people claiming to have the intention of containing the threat, they did not do much. I strongly believe that they knew about the animals appearing after the disappearances, yet they only set up a few strange devices all around the place and just left. I was not going to miss them anyway. Whatever trick or technology that was helping the culprits abduct those kids, I was going to discover it. What if it was actually the work of those government guys? I thought at some point. After all, for people with considerable means, they did not seem to try hard enough to put an end to the nightmare. Therefore, I was going to do just that. I tried to convince my colleagues to go back on the scene and wait, as we initially planned, but the government people suddenly became a big enough reason for them to change their minds. I went back alone. I parked my car at an angle where I could have full view of the back of the factory and waited. I waited long hours, from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., fighting hunger, tiredness, and sleep, just waiting to see what would emerge. I hoped that the government guys' strange devices would not jeopardize my plans somehow, and was finally rewarded at exactly 10:17 p.m. A faint, yellow light glowed all of a sudden near the back entrance, and behind a box for no more than 5 seconds. I wanted to inspect it at close range, so I got out of my car, and as a result could not see when the light stopped. One of the government people devices located nearby started acting strangely, emitting loud beeping sounds, and I did not want it to spoil everything, so I kicking it down to turn it off and damaged it. I carefully approached the area, occasionally looking around just in case, and as expected, right where the light shone just moments ago, I saw the blackest cat I have ever seen and will ever see in my life sitting there with its back on me. I froze, watching its peculiar behavior. It was stretching, but not like the animal it was, rather like the way humans roll their heads around to make their necks crack. As soon as it sensed me, it also froze and slowly turned its head to look at me standing there, a few meters away, revealing its glowing eyes. That cat did not have a shred of fear of me. Still looking at me, it then slowly turned its entire body to face me, then standing on all fours, before making its way towards a broken window. I know it may sound ridiculous, but its behavior seemed to speak to me, in a rather confident and condescending way, such as, "Looks like you finally found me. Well, I accept the challenge. Let's settle this now. Follow me." That was how I felt it. That was how it looked like to me. The cat leaped and landed on the window frame, looked back at me one last time, before going inside the factory. The moment it disappeared behind the wall, the yellow light appeared inside for about 2 seconds, then vanished, confirming that the animal was indeed its source. I gathered the immense courage to follow that cat into the dark and the unknown of the abandoned factory, using the same window, and landed on a machine, then on the floor. Flashlight and gun out, I braced myself and started advancing, ready to confront the culprits and put an end to the nightmare. Countless machines that I did not really recognize revealed themselves under the flashlight, placed in rows, and most of them covered with old, discolored, and dusty sheets. My heartbeat quickening, I scanned the surroundings carefully until I spotted something out of the ordinary. Seated on one of the machines and watching me was a spider. A large spider so massive that it seemed to have difficulties to move fast enough as it hid behind the covered machine. I kept calm and courage after gasping and still advanced carefully. A yellow light shone from behind the machine, shortly just like before, then vanished. I gasped again and almost spoke to it when a husky dog, just like in the video footage involving the 3 little girls, Betty, Maria and Jennifer, emerged from behind the machine. It had the same behavior and confidence as the cat, staring at my soul as it sauntered towards the next machine and disappeared behind it. The yellow light shortly returned again, and on the other side a deer emerged, still staring at me, walking towards the next machine. It repeated the process, hiding behind the machine, yellow light for a short time, until a new animal emerged from the other side. That time, it was the snake from the Spencer video footage. The reptile hid behind another machine, and the yellow light shortly appeared again. But this time, the animal remained hidden, waiting for me to uncover it. By that time, I was shaking uncontrollably, dominated by fear. I considered running away while I still could because I had no idea what was going on and what I was up against. But the children, I had to do it for the children and their families. Trembling, I made my way towards the machine, breathing so heavily that I knew the animal could hear me and sense every bit of my fear. I put the flashlight between my teeth to free my left hand and extended it to remove the sheet. The moment I pulled it off the machine, a bird escaped from behind it and flew past me, right above my head. I could not help but scream this time. I then picked up the flashlight and tried to keep the bird under the light, but it was very fast and made its way through an open entrance, turning right and disappearing in a corridor. Once again, yellow light shortly, followed by massive stomping sounds, and through the entrance, I saw an elephant running from the right to the left. I was shocked, paralyzed and afraid. Once more, yellow light shortly, and for the first time, the animal made a sound with its mouth. It was a roar, announcing its terrifying new form as one of those big cats, a lion or a tiger maybe, or perhaps something much worse. I could not continue. I dashed towards the window, hoping that whatever that was would not give chase, and climbed on the machine next to the opening. I looked back at the corridor entrance and saw nothing but an eye shining in the dark, staring at me. It was big enough for me to see that it was a left eye, precisely a left yellow pupil. I still remember the exact and only word that escaped from my mouth. Why? I know it does not make any sense, but I want you to picture this. When you see that somebody despises you, you can see it on their face. The frowning, the death stare, the way the lips curve downward. A group of elements forming the face that serves to reflect the sentiment of that person towards you. Now imagine hatred, disgust, and evil intent all conveyed through only an eye, one single eye. This is why I asked myself why. Why do you hate me so much? Why do you want to rip me apart? What history do we have that led to such extremes? The monster did not move, fortunately. I did not intend to clearly see what form it took this time as I hurt my ankle, storming through the window to escape it. Still on the ground, using my gun covered with some snow, I turned around and aimed at the window because I expected the animal to appear at the frame. It did not. I then stood up and limped to my car, only to see the black cat standing on the roof of the vehicle, waiting for me, staring at me with the same glowing yellow left eye, the same yellow pupil, its extreme hatred multiplied by the visibility of its entire head. I abandoned the vehicle. Gun in hand, I limped for hours, constantly looking around me to see if the animal was pursuing me, bewildering the occasional motorists who saw me fleeing. Never in my life have I been so afraid, and to this day, nothing and nobody ever scared me in the way that thing did. Whatever it is. However, this is only the part one remember. Some colleagues told me that I was found under a bridge, acting erratically, repeating to myself how much of a piece of shit I was, and that the sunset was close, whatever it meant. I retired a few days later. Who could believe that I would one day tell stories of the supernatural? The only thing I can say is that certain things out there are beyond any form of explanations. I failed to solve the cases and retired. The agents came to our house again to threaten us in a much more convincing way, and this time we listened to them. At least, they have been kind enough not to ask me to pay for the device I had damaged, which of course cost millions. My family and I moved far away from that place and all the way to another continent, as initially suggested by my husband. I am even more grateful for the well-being and safety of my children. I do not know what that thing is, and I do not care to know. I am still scared of animals to this day, and could never step into a zoo, a forest, or a park since. Every time an animal looks at me, I freeze completely. I do not know why those government guys want to keep things secret, or even if that thing is still snatching kids, but I will never say this enough. Please be careful. Some strange beings live among us, and sometimes things are not as they seem. The apocalypse started on a Tuesday, not with fire, not with war, not with aliens blowing up the White House. Just weird shit. People woke up and their reflections didn't match. Buildings stretched too high, too thin. Street signs whispered when you walked past. And some people just disappeared. Like poof. Gone. I should have known things were bad when I stepped outside and the sky was the wrong color. It wasn't blue. It wasn't gray. It was, I don't know, like a color I'd never seen before but somehow recognized. Like when you hear a song you don't remember, but you know all the words. Anyway, that was day 1. By day 3, reality was drunk off its ass. Gravity started working on a freelance basis. Some people floated away like balloons. Others got stuck to the ground. The moon got way too close, like a nosy neighbor leaning over the fence. And the sun, well, there were 2 of them now. By day 5, most people were either dead, missing, or existentially broken. Not me though. I had a plan. Well, plan is a strong word. More like a stolen shopping cart, a backpack full of canned goods, and a gun I found on a priest. Listen, he wasn't using it. Probably. The important thing is, I wasn't sticking around. See, there was a rumor going around. A safe place. A town that hadn't been touched by all this Willy Wonka acid trip bullshit. It was 500 miles east. So that's where I was headed. Just me, my cart, and the rapidly deteriorating rules of reality. And let me tell you, this road trip was gonna suck. Day 7, the trees started talking. Not like whispering creepy shit. Just small talk. The ocean was now inland and very, very angry about it. I found a dog. The dog spoke perfect English. He was also kind of an asshole. Day 10, I met a guy with no face. He played the banjo. Pretty good, actually. The sun winked at me. I flipped it off. I think I hurt its feelings. The ground became water, but only when I wasn't looking at it. Dog stole my last can of beans. I will never forgive him. Day 15, I ran into a cult. They worship a giant floating eye. The eye tried to recruit me. I told it to fuck off. I am now being hunted by an omniscient celestial entity. On the bright side, found a Snickers bar. Day 20, the road turned into a Mobius strip. I walked for 3 days before realizing I was going in a loop. The Snickers bar had a pulse. I ate it anyway. Reality started cracking. Literally. There are holes in the world. I looked into one. Something looked back. By day 25, I was starting to enjoy myself. I mean, sure, existence was breaking down like a shitty bootleg DVD. But at this point, I'd seen so much mind-melting horror that I was kind of numb to it. So when I finally reached the safe place, I wasn't even surprised that it was worse. See, everyone was fine here. Too fine. No monsters. No sky meltdowns. No whispering shadows. Just people. Smiling. Perfect. Too perfect. I watched a woman burn her hand on a stove. No reaction. No flinch. Just a big, frozen smile. I watched a man get hit by a car. He got back up, bones twisted wrong, and kept walking like nothing happened. Then a kid ran up to me. Big, dead eyes. He grabbed my hand, and his fingers kept going. Stretching. Wrapping around my wrist like rope. He leaned in close. You don't belong here. I yanked away, heart hammering. The whole town was staring at me now. Still smiling. Still wrong. And that's when I realized. This wasn't a safe place. This was where reality went to die. And I had just walked right in. Everyone at the potluck was cracking jokes and elbowing this tall guy I'd never seen before. Some mysterious, pale, Slavic-looking man named Tony. Dee Dee brought her usual 24-pack from the brewery, and somehow, Tony was given the first beer from the case. A privilege I'd never once received. Then I saw Jess, our building manager, challenge Tony to a game of darts with her son. They looked like experts when they played, as if Jess always did this with Tony. Except she didn't. I'd never seen Jess or her son play darts. It was all very weird. I swam through the rec room, ignoring the Super Bowl noise on the TV, and individually asked my neighbors who this Tony guy was. All I got were laughs and reminders of all the great things he'd done around our building. Tony? He's so handy. He fixed the pressure in my sink once. Used to be a plumber. Such a nice guy. He gave $100 for my daughter's bat mitzvah. Did you know that? His 4-layer cake at the Christmas party was incredible. Remember the icing? I did not remember the icing. I'd been a decade-long resident of this 12-plex and attended almost all of our monthly parties in the rec room. I could tell you the names of all the residents and which suite they lived in. Tony did not live in any of them. Why was everyone pretending that he did? Eventually, I built up the courage to do what had to be done. I cracked open a beer, took a big swig, and then walked up to Tony with an open palm. "Hey pal, nice to meet you. I'm Ignatius." Tony raised an eyebrow and cracked a laugh. "Nice to meet you, Iggy. I'm Anthony. Is this a how you say a role play?" I couldn't place the accent. Somewhere between Budapest and Moscow. A role play? No, I don't believe we've met before. Tony chuckled again and lightly punched my shoulder. "Always the funny guy, huh? Book any new roles?" My last auditions had been pretty unsuccessful the past few months, but this was not the time to discuss that. "No, I'm being serious, Tony. I don't think we've met. How long have you lived here?" Tony giggled and clapped his hands. "Oh man, you are very convincing, you know." "I'm not. This isn't a joke." He dragged Dee into the conversation. "Iggy's doing a great performance. Check him out." She cracked a new beer. "Iggy Giggly, new stand-up?" "No guys, this isn't. I'm not doing a bit." I took a step away from them both, gesturing at the pale stranger. "I don't know Tony. I've never met him." Dee narrowed her eyes and drank her beer. "Is this like anti-humor or something?" Flustered, I walked away and grabbed the first person I could find. "Jess." She was mid-conversation with Marcelo, who was giving her son a piggyback ride. She spun around, startled. "Iggy? Jess, this isn't a joke. I'm seriously kind of worried. I don't remember Tony at all. Everyone says they remember him living here. But I do not. Do you remember Tony? Please tell me." "Oh yes. Of course, I remember Tony." She looked at me with a tilted head. "For how long?" I don't know, the whole time I've lived here. 7 years? 7 years? No fucking way. No. That's not right." "What's not right, Iggy?" Dee and Tony came over, looking really concerned. "Everything okay?" I lifted my hands. I was completely dumbfounded by how all of this was happening. Utterly flabbergasted. Were all my neighbors just fucking with me? I didn't want to work myself up any further, so I let it go. "You know what? Sorry guys. I'm a little drunk." All my neighbors stared at me, unconvinced. There was a lull in the room. An icy silence. Dee took another sip of beer. "By a little, you mean a lot drunk?" Everyone laughed. The tension broke instantly. Tony even gave a little clap. "Iggy, you're always a funny guy, man. Every time." I left the party early. I didn't really know what else to say. I was a little embarrassed, but mostly frustrated and angry. How is this possible? Am I missing something? Maybe I'd been hit with some kind of selective amnesia. Maybe I bonked my head somewhere and happened to erase the root memory of some random European neighbor from my building. But when I returned home, I knew that wasn't the case. Next to my apartment, 012, where there should have been a cramped slide door leading into the utility closet, was now, in its place, a simple mahogany door, much like my own, and above it, the numbers read 013. No way. This is fucked. I touched the door. It felt real. The doorknob, brass. The numbers, plastic. Bolting into my own place, I locked myself inside. I could feel the minute vibrations of an oncoming panic attack course through my torso. I exhaled over and over until the feeling lessened a bit. "It's okay. I'm okay. Let's think about this." I was inside the utility closet this morning, recording power usage numbers for the strata, which meant I should have video evidence. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through my most recent clips. Sure enough, I found a video from this morning. The camera panned across the power meters, recording the kilowatt hours. 10, 11, 12 meters. Then the camera lifted up, showing the exit into the hall. From a skewed angle, I could see my door. I could literally see my door in this video. This video, which was recorded from inside the utility closet, which is now replaced by Unit 013. I tossed my phone aside and held my temples. What the hell is happening? Maybe I was having a mind blip. A random window into Alzheimer's or something. I washed my face, gave myself a slap, and did 2 shots of Crown Royal. After 5 minutes of building up the courage, I opened my door to take one last look outside. No sooner had I removed the slide lock than I heard Tony's voice. "Iggy, how you doing?" He was standing right outside, keys out, ready to enter his Unit 013, smiling at me with a small, jovial grin. He had to be close to 7 feet tall. At least, that's what he looked like in this low-ceilinged hallway. And he was looking lankier than before, with smaller eyes. Tony, hey. I tried to sound unperturbed by all my revelations. I swallowed a lump. Sorry for, teasing you earlier. Teasing? Oh no, I thought it was a good act. Very funny. As if I never existed. Really funny idea. I gripped my doorknob tight and tried to act as casual as I could. Play along, my acting coach would say. Play along and see what your partner says. How long do you think we've known each other, Tony? I tried to give him a friendly look. Feels like ages, right? Tony's smile widened, as if he had been expecting this question. He drew a circle in the air around me with an exaggerated finger. I've known you since you were a little child, Ignatius. Ever since you were born, 30 miles away. I scoffed, alarmed by this accurate information, and by his strange behavior. Tony was putting on a deeper voice, too. Why? Was he now doing a bit? Since I was a child? I asked. Yes, since you were a child. You were inseminated on July 14th, redacted, and you broke your mother's amniotic sac exactly 9 months later. Tony's grew lower, speaking from his stomach. You first recognized yourself in the mirror on December 12th, redacted, and 21 months after that, you learned that all things die and that death is permanent. I staggered a little, tried to stay composed. Is this a weird joke, Tony? Who said joke? Tony dropped his pretend deep voice and looked at me with an earnest seriousness I wasn't expecting. I am taking over your place in this community. You have 2 days to move. My hand cramped from my grip on the knob. What? 2 days, Iggy. 2? Yes. I am a observer. I have observed many lives on Earth. Yours looked fun. Lots of friends. Close-by families with young children. All in one apartment. Perfect life for Skevdoc. Skev? My name. You can tell whoever you want. No one will believe you. Skevdoc is already here. Nothing you can do. I was shocked. I didn't quite know who or what I was talking to, but these were literally the words that came out of his mouth. Why did you bring up young children? I will swap them eventually too, with fresh Skevlings. No one will notice or care. Just like with you. It might have been the hallway light, but his neck and limbs appeared to have lengthened ever so slightly. His eyes looked smaller too. I took another step back and prepared to close the door. I was overwhelmed by this whole entire evening. But Tony kept talking, pointing directly at my face. I'm replacing you, Ignatius. They will start to forget you tomorrow, and the day after, they will forget you completely. If you are not gone by day 3, you will die. I let go of the doorknob. My hand was shaking too much to hold it. I brought my hands up to my face, and that's when Tony burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. He slapped the wall beside him. Ha 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 ha. Gotcha. It's all a joke. Iggy. Ha 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 ha. All joke. He draped a hand over my shoulder and gave a squeeze. It was surprisingly hard. It held me quite firmly in place. Pretty good, right? I am a good actor, right? I could barely bring myself to look up at his face. When I did, I swear it seemed like his head was towering down from the ceiling, like he was leering at me from the sky. Why yes, I mumbled. You're a good actor, very convincing. His pinhole eyes glimmered in their sockets. Good. I think so too. The next day, I called a rideshare and GTFO'd. I had lived in that building for nearly 11 years, and I thought I would live for 11 more, but there was no way in hell I could stay after that night. I don't know how Tony was doing it, but he was draining me, replacing me. I could feel it across my scalp the whole night. My memories with Jess, Marcelo, Didi, and everyone else, they were fuzzier than before. Fainter. It was like Tony was scooping them out and remolding them into his own. My Uber arrived at 5:13 a.m., and I shoved 2 heavy suitcases inside and did not look back. I spent the next month and a half at a hotel on the opposite side of town before I found a new place. My family all thought I was having a midlife crisis or something, and I leaned into it and told them I was. I said I wanted to try living downtown, meet some new people, give myself a refresh. It seemed to be in line with turning 41, and maybe that's exactly what my life needed. Fast forward past a couple successful auditions and open mic stand-up sets, and managed to meet my new partner, Amelia. She's really nice. It didn't take long for her to ask about all the photos on my Facebook of the old apartment. 10 years of memories in that old 12-plex, Evergreen Pines. At least I think that's what it was called. I couldn't remember the name really, or the address. I was caught off guard when she presented me with all the pictures on her iPad. There was a photo of me grilling sausages for some small kid who did not look familiar. There was a photo of me having a beer pong competition with a woman in a Molson Brewing hat. She was blowing a raspberry. There was a photo of me singing at some karaoke thing, surrounded by people, including that sausage kid and the woman in the Molson Brewing hat. After 10 minutes, it got really embarrassing. Amelia was a little offended that I wasn't remembering anyone from before. She accused me of trying to lie about my past or something. I told her that wasn't the case. Amelia, I'm serious. I know there was a reason I left my old apartment, but I can't remember. That's ridiculous. It's true. I swear. Of course, the more I started talking about it, the more I actually did remember a little. Despite forgetting all my past neighbors and friends from that apartment, I did not forget about Tony. In fact, Tony was the dark reminder of the whole event. By remembering him, I was able to rewrite this story with pseudonyms and my best guess as to what my life was like before. He was the one who took that all away. But Amelia didn't need to know that. I bit my lip and cheekily murmured, "I really don't remember anything, babe." She stared at me with an unimpressed face, totally blasé. "Oh my God, Iggy, are you doing a bit?" "I can't recall anything at all." "Right, okay. Very creepy. Knock it off. So do you remember these people or not?" I proceeded to nod and improvise names and backstories for everyone she pointed to. I told her that these were all very close friends, but we sort of drifted apart, and I didn't see them anymore. She seemed to buy it. There was just one last photo of me that caught her attention. A photo at a Super Bowl party where I was holding a plate of nachos above my head. "Why do you look so weird in this one?" My neck looked longer. My eyes looked smaller. I knew that was not me in that photo. I have no idea how I uploaded it onto my own Facebook account. It didn't make sense. But I didn't want to think about it. I wanted it move on. To close this fucked chapter. "Oh yeah, that's what whey protein shakes do to ya," I said, doing my best Rodney Dangerfield. Amelia laughed. I deleted the photo. I've never brought up my old apartment again. My grandmother died when I was 6. About a week later, I realized something very important. It was by accident. We were in the living room. I was on the floor playing with my dolls and wishing my mom would play with me. Mom was seated on the couch, staring at the wall. She hadn't been talking much to me since grandmother died, or doing much of anything. I looked up at my silent mom, opened my mouth, and without knowing why, I said, "Grandmother says you should play with me." The response was wonderful. Mom's eyes widened and she looked at me, straight at me, seeing me. She got off the couch and knelt by me, hugged me and exclaimed, "Oh my darling daughter, grandmother said that to you," and then burst into sobs. Her face wet with tears, she picked up my doll and began moving it along the floor. After that, I knew that Mom would listen when grandmother asked her to do something. It was like grandmother had never died, when she used to make Mom give me a cookie. It must have been a month after that, and I just remembered something that grandmother had told me. I turned to Mom, opened my mouth, and said, "Grandmother said Aunt Viola was such a pretty child. Such a pity she became fat." Again, I got a wonderful response. Mom's eyes widened with shock. She knelt down by me, her eyes fully on me, and said, "Maya, how could you know that? When did grandmother say this to you?" I blinked. I couldn't remember well, and the look on Mom's face was a bit scary. Maybe grandmother said it to me those days I used to stay with her. When Mom was working, Mom would leave me with her at 2 and pick me up later when I was sleepy. Grandmother used to talk about fatness a lot, or maybe she said it some other time. "Yesterday," I said. "She said it to me yesterday, when we were at the park, looking at fat children." "Yes, that must be right." Mom and another woman were talking about fat children, like grandmother used to. Mom hugged me so tightly that I felt like my breathing would stop. Her tears felt warm on my neck and made my t-shirt damp. "Oh, my precious daughter," sobbed Mom. Mom told Aunt Viola what I had told her, and she asked me to tell Aunt Viola herself. "Look, Viola, I told you Mother is talking to us through Maya. Tell her, Maya. Tell your aunt what grandmother told you." I remember so well, looking at my mom, mother, and my aunt, their shining, desperate eyes. I opened my mouth and repeated, "Grandmother told me you were such a pretty child, Aunt Viola. Such a pity you became fat." Aunt Viola cried out as if punched, clapping her hand to her mouth. Mom beamed proudly at me, her special daughter who could talk to grandmother. Everyone knew I was special because I could talk to grandmother who told me things. My cousins treated me respectfully after that, even though I was the youngest, and even my uncles nodded at me when they came over for family dinner. My cousins tried to make me say other things I had heard from dead people. I would start to say something, but then Mom and Aunt Viola told them off. It's not a party trick. Stop bothering Maya. And then one day, when I was 10, one of my cousins, actually my favorite cousin, Aria, told me that her father hurt her. I knew I had to stop it. After all, wasn't I special? And wasn't Aria the nicest to me? I waited for the next family dinner. Then I opened my mouth and spoke up. Uncle, I said clearly. The voices fell quiet. Everyone knew that tone meant that grandmother had a message for someone. Uncle, I repeated. Grandmother said you need to stop hurting my cousin. There was silence. Uncle made a sort of noise. So did Mom. Then I gasped. It was like I couldn't breathe. I cried out, clutching my throat. The air rippled and heaved. Through the thick, darkening air, I could see everyone's face blurry, staring at me, not moving. I gasped again, and my throat seemed to close up, and I felt like I had the worst possible sore throat. For a flash instant, I saw grandmother in the darkness that was closing in on me. I was trying to scream, but no sound came from my mouth. Then it was over. I opened my eyes, standing very still at the dinner table, holding on to the back of the chair. My throat was still very sore, but the unbearable pain had passed. I made a noise, but no words came out. After that dinner, I could never speak again. And even after I learned to communicate with no voice, I never, ever talked about grandmother and grandmother's children ever again. My cousin Aria and I left our family home when we could, and we never went back. He's dead, I thought, finally realizing, stood over his body. What am I going to do? And truth was, I had no idea. Murder was a serious charge. I'd watched those true crime documentaries. I knew how this worked. The killer always gets caught, no matter what. God, I'm a killer. I looked around. We were in a small clearing in the woods east from my house. Woods that nobody ever went into, which was partly why we did. It was so that we could do whatever we wanted. You know, stupid challenges, games, that sort of thing. Stuff for laughs. But I wasn't laughing, and Josh certainly wasn't either. I looked back down at his body. It was awful. His clothes were torn and tattered, and his face was split open in an awful way, down the left side of his head. You'd have to squint hard if you even wanted to lie to yourself that it looked anything remotely human. I felt another pang of adrenaline. I need to be smart. I need to make this go away. I have to. I moved over to my left. There was a ditch here, about 2 meters deep, shallow on one side but rocky on the other. I looked back behind me towards Josh's bike and started to piece a story together. Maybe, I thought, maybe he was riding his bike down here. He got distracted by something. Maybe he went into these sharp rocks. Along the shallow side of the ditch, there was a bit where the rim turned upwards like a ramp. Okay, he went along here, this ramp. Got distracted. Hit the rocks. It was the only thing I could think of. Maybe the sharp rocks slit his face like that. It might be a little far-fetched, but it was the best I could think of. I took a deep breath and lifted Josh. He was heavier than I thought, and I almost slipped in the wet dirt as I hoisted him over my shoulder and carefully placed him in the ditch. I tried to make it look like he was crawling away. He probably wouldn't have died straight away. Satisfied with the placement of him, I turned my attention to the bike. It was still pristine, as me and him had just stopped and leant them against a tree earlier on. That's not going to work, I thought. It needs to be bashed up more. I grabbed his bike and slowly rolled it down the mud in the path it would have gone, and then lifted it up and threw it across the ditch into the rocks. I picked it back up and did it again. That looks all right. I didn't pick it back up afterwards. It was already in a good spot, and probably would be more authentic if I didn't pose it. The last thing I did was take my jacket off, with all the blood on it, hoisted it under my arm, put it on the seat of my bike, and, after taking one last look back, rode back home. I left Josh there, and with him, a little bit of myself as well. I unlocked the front door of my house and hurried inside. I ran up to my room immediately and hid the coat under my bed. I'll figure out what to do with it later. I dulled my brain with a shooter game, barely paying attention. The rain outside was a small mercy. Maybe it would wash some evidence away. My mum was coming back from work by now, and so I was now trying to act in higher spirits so nothing seemed too off. I guessed I probably had up until this evening before the police would be called. Josh usually lingered in town for a few hours after we hung out, and so it wasn't unusual for him to be home late. But he wouldn't come home today. I heard the key turn in the door. It made me jump. I got up and plastered a smile across my face and went to meet her at the front door. "Hello, Dan," she called from the hallway. "Hey, Mum. I said, lingering in the doorway, arms crossed. Did you have fun with Josh today? She said, back turned to me, hanging her coat up. Yeah. Yeah, I did. Had to come home a bit early, though. He said he needed to do something. Ah, well, I'm sure it was important. Anyway, it's the holidays now. You could always hang out with him tomorrow. Yeah, I said, my smile slowly fading. When I went to bed that night, every time I closed my eyes I could see that ditch etched into my mind. The mangled roots, the mangled bike, the mangled body. I got maybe half an hour of sleep before my alarm jolted me awake at 5 a.m. I immediately remembered Josh's face, twisted, warped, impossible. I felt like a stranger in my skin. The air was suffocating. The rooms in my house felt far larger than I'd ever noticed, and that they had any right to be. Large and empty. Nothing felt right. I don't know how to describe it to you because I can't even really understand it myself. But the thought of Josh's parents sat there, worried building, waiting anxiously for a boy who would never come back, their only son, made me feel. I felt sick. I'm not sure if my mom had noticed that something was up. I mean, she must have, but I noticed her giving me weird looks for that entire morning. Occasional glances. All of this pressure kept building and building and building and building to an almost unbearable level until, at about 1 in the afternoon, there was a knock on the door. My mom answered it, and as I sat there in the living room, head in my hands, I could hear what the man at the door was saying. It was muffled, but clear enough for me to hear parts of it. Yes. No, he didn't. His parents haven't seen him. If we could just... Dan, my mom said, opening the door and letting the man into the room. This man here just needs to ask you some questions. It's about Josh. I bottled everything down, swallowed, and then spoke as clearly as I could. Maybe a little bit too quickly, but it was the best I could do. Josh. I looked away from my mum, and now at the officer. He had a warm, kind facial expression, but with a tinge of unease and awkwardness. He was about to break the news. I'm not supposed to know yet. What's happened to him? I chuckled slightly. Has he gotten himself into some more? I trailed off. Listen, Dan. Josh hasn't been seen since yesterday morning. Now, we've spoken to his mother, and she says that she last saw him when he went out with you. Now, if that's true, this means that you might have been the last person to see him. I was staring at the name tag on his uniform. I didn't interpret it as letters, just shapes. I wasn't really focusing on it anyway. He shuffled in his seat slightly. Look, I know it's a lot to handle right now, and I understand that you two were close, but do you think that we could just ask you some questions? I told him that we went up into the woods, although I lied about where exactly. Then I said that after a little while of just chilling out, he'd gone further in, and I'd just turned around and gotten home. All the while, the officer was nodding comfortingly and never once changed facial expression from that slight smile, the smile that didn't reach the eyes. I suppose I was relieved, I guess, that I wasn't being taken in or arrested. In fact, I didn't get any sort of feeling that he even considered me a suspect. And I don't blame him. I don't have a history of anything. I never get into fights at school. I keep my head down. There's not a lot to go on there. And one kid in the woods on his own. Anything could have happened. A murder, especially by the kid's best friend, probably wouldn't be high on the list of possibilities. After about half an hour, the officer left, saying he would keep us posted on the search effort, and that was that. Apart from the odd missing poster put up around town, there wasn't really much reminding me of Josh. I'd stopped riding my bike though. That, at least, was something that reminded me of that scene. But it was getting easier. I got rid of the jacket with all of the blood on it, and although the officers came back to the house a few times, I stuck to the same story, and after a few days they stopped. I felt like I could finally start moving on, at least. And occasionally, I'd pass by the window of Josh's house on the way into town and see his mother sat, head in hands, and she'd give me that comforting smile, the same one that didn't quite reach the eyes, and I'd return it. And deep down, I didn't know if it was worse, that I had done the crime in the first place, or the fact that I was brushing it off so easily. However, this brief comfort ended about a week after the day I'd killed him, because after I'd hidden his mangled body in a ditch and lied to everyone I knew, I got a knock on the door, and as I peered through the window to check who it was, my blood ran cold. Josh was stood outside my front door, grinning. I just sort of stood there like an idiot. It was him, of course it was. It was Josh. And somehow his face looked fine. It looked normal. His face was all back in place, and his clothes looked fine. He'd noticed me by this point. He waved to grab my attention and, with that grin still on his face, eagerly pointed towards the door, mouthing, "Let me in." I didn't know exactly what to think, but I found myself unlocking the front door. And there he was. The person I'd left muddied and bloodied in the woods stood about a meter away from me, clean and healthy. He pushed past me without a word and walked in. "Hey, I thought we were going back out to the woods today." It took me a second to turn around and face him, to process what he had just said. "Josh, are you dash?" "Well, are we gonna go then?" he interrupted, still grinning, but with slight impatience. He pushed back past me into the garden before I even had a chance to say anything and got on his bike that he had left leant against the front of my house. That clean, very much not battered bike. I rode next to him. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. I could still see his mangled face in my mind. It still haunted me, and now, it was all too much. It was supposed to be final. I'd convinced him to avoid the woods. He'd protested, but I was adamant. I didn't want to go back there anytime soon. And I wasn't sure what I'd find there anyway. He was still smiling. It hadn't fallen once since he'd arrive at my house, and it wasn't getting any less unsettling. We were riding now into town. He said we'd go and pick up some food, then sit down somewhere and just hang. I looked back at him again. He slowed to a stop. "Hey, look at that!" I turned and faced the other way. He was pointing at one of those missing posters that his mother, only a few days ago, had plastered up on every pole or wall around town. "What about it?" My voice hollowed, managed at least to blurt that out coherently enough. "Well, I dunno. It's weird how everyone thought I was missing for a week, right? Even my mum. It's not like her to forget." I furrowed my brow. Seeing that missing poster at least meant that I wasn't going crazy. But still, I had to be cuckoo somehow. I mean, she even called the police, if you can believe that. I grunted. "But it's okay," he continued. I told her about what happened, and she phoned them saying it was all right. I noticed I was slowing down, so I caught back up to him as we rode further up our road past his house. We both slowed as we approached the window. My eyes involuntarily drifted toward it. I looked, and after Josh waving, we both saw his mother grinning and waving back, her head moving between two people. Two people. I stopped suddenly. He stopped too and looked at me in confusion. I tried to think about how to ask this. I didn't want to be too direct, but I still needed to know the truth. "Listen, Josh," I looked at him. He nodded. "What did you mean when you said your mum forgot?" He started chuckling and seemed to relax a bit. "Well, it's the funniest thing." He leaned in closer towards me. "She somehow doesn't remember driving me up to the camping spot last Tuesday. Isn't that mad?" I blurted an affirmation. "Tuesday. That was the day after I killed him." I pressed further. Do you remember what happened last Monday?" His grin stopped for a moment and then returned. "Well, come on, of course I remember. You do too, right? In the woods." He chuckled and started riding again. I joined him, dumbfounded. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, as difficult as that was, and pretended everything was fine. We stopped off at the chip shop, picked some food up, and rode up to the park just as we would do often. It was really odd. It wasn't the fact he was back from the dead that freaked me out. It was the way he was acting. He was like this normally, stupidly positive. And before, that was something that was good. Things were always fun with Josh, but now it was creeping me out. And the fact that he seemed to know what I did to him as well. Does he know I killed him? We sat and ate in silence. I couldn't think of anything to say, and he seemed to be perfectly content eating his chips, so I didn't feel a need to say anything. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. "What have you been up to in the last week then, while I was gone?" He paused, smiling. "Camping." "Camping?" I found myself mutter. "Yeah, of course. I messaged you last week about it. Don't tell me you're forgetting too." His teeth chomped down on another chip. I felt for my phone. I hadn't gotten a text from him. I knew that. I had spent the first few days after I'd killed him constantly rereading our last conversation. I unlocked my phone, Josh still happily eating, and navigated to our messages. I read our last conversation. It was on Sunday. I breathed a sigh of relief. It didn't happen. Josh stopped eating and looked at my phone. He grabbed it out of my hands. "Why are you up here?" he chortled. "Look, you have to scroll down, you knob." He scrolled the chat down and then thrust the phone into my face. I read what it said. Monday, 12:10 p.m. Josh, oi Dan, listen, I'm going camping tomorrow. Can't remember if I told you or not. I swallowed. I'd never seen that text before. He frowned suddenly and looked back at my phone. "Oh look," he said. I didn't scroll far enough. He fumbled with it for a second and then placed it into my hands. He turned away and continued eating. I looked and focused down at the phone. It was the most recent message, on Monday last week at 12:12 p.m. It said, "Mate, why do you never invite me to these things, lol?" Anyway, hope you have fun, bro. I chuckled nervously for a split second, and then stopped myself. The text is from me. I looked at Josh, keeping eye contact with him while slowly turning my phone off and placing it into my pocket. He wiped his greasy hands on his jeans and smiled. You gonna eat any of yours? I hadn't even touched my portion. I looked around the park for a second. The only exit was in front of us, in front of the bench. I looked back at Josh. Yeah, listen. I sprang to my feet and got onto my bike. As I started pedaling, I shouted to him, "You can finish them." I turned my attention back to what was in front of me. I knew where I needed to go. I could hear him calling my name, no doubt getting on his bike and chasing after me. But I knew what I needed to do and where I needed to go. But first of all, I had to lose him. As I left the park gates, I immediately turned left into an alley, and then turned right. I continued straight ahead for a while, before turning out back onto the main road. I was heading towards the woods. I slowed slightly and turned around. I couldn't see him. I didn't know how close he was, but he didn't have line of sight to me, which was something. I gritted my teeth and entered into the woods. I still remembered the route we went through that day. It wasn't a particularly difficult one, as it was mainly a straight line with a hard left turn, and the landmarks along the route were distinct enough for me to remember easily. And when I got there, my suspicions were confirmed. The body in the bike was still there, exactly as I left it. It was rotting now. I gagged and looked away. So what the fuck is the Josh I was just eating chips with? I didn't know what to do. I could point the body out to the police. That would work. An autopsy would say that the body was rotting for a week. That would prove that the Josh that was still alive was some kind of fake, but would they then realize that it was me? I didn't know what to do. I wanted to turn it in. Don't do that. I turned around. Josh was stood next to his bike, about maybe 10 meters away from me. He wasn't smiling anymore. How did you, what the fuck are you? I said, but he didn't answer. You're not going to tell the police anything, he said. I'll be back up here in a bit to sort all of this out. What are you? I repeated. You let me live my life, and I'll let you live yours. We won't talk about this again. His voice was sounding oddly deep and raspy. Remember, it's what you did. I'll see you soon. But before I could respond, he was already far away. I've been living in Ohio for about 13 years now. I was 13 when we moved here. And it's been about as boring and uneventful as you'd expect rural Ohio to be. Cornfields at both ends of the street. Houses spread out with plenty of land, chicken coops, horse stables. Being woken up to the echoing crack of what is surely a neighbor firing off rounds at a haystack or cans, and so on. It's not even a very religious area either. Just a lot of wannabe country folk who live in Ohio. And one neighbor who named their son Cameron with a K, so that his initials would be KKK. I wish I was kidding, but I've seen the birth certificate. Anyways, that was just to help you understand where I was living, as it makes what I witnessed 29 hours ago now feel that much more out of place. 3 a.m. on a Friday night in rural Ohio may as well be used as a filming location for zombie movies, due to how quiet and desolate everything around you feels. You may hear one car drive by in the span of a night, and none of the neighbors are very active, at least not usually. Last night, however, they had guests over in the evening around 6 p.m., and I thought absolutely nothing of it. Why would I? Certainly wasn't the first time they had company, but it was peculiar when nobody left as the hours ticked by. At midnight, when I normally went to bed, I happened to look out my bedroom window, which has a view of their lengthy driveway, and noticed that all 8 cars were still there. It wasn't necessarily strange, but they weren't mid-20s people like me who could just be drinking and laughing their asses off. The couple who lived there were probably in their late 50s or early 60s, and most of the guests that I saw were all around the same age range. I wasn't particularly tired last night, so I threw on my headphones and played Pokemon on my Switch for about 2 hours or so, basically until I started to yawn and feel tired. After turning my Switch off and putting it and my headphones away, I happened to glance out my window and once again noticed that every car was still in my neighbor's driveway. However, something was happening out there now. For starters, a few of the men circled around the trunk of a black SUV, talking amongst themselves as they were looking inside and gesturing to something. I didn't have any thoughts about the matter yet, but then one of them suddenly cocked back and threw a fist into the trunk. I couldn't see who or what was punched, but moments later I saw 2 of them drag a large black duffel bag out of the trunk, and they slowly carried it inside. This is when my stomach began to twist into knots. In hindsight, I should have just continued being the oblivious individual I was and turned away to go to bed, but I found myself drawn to whatever they were doing. Was I witnessing a crime in real time? Was I getting too invested in a bunch of old people hanging out on a Friday night when I was home alone? Who could say really? For the next half hour, my eyes peeked through the shut blinds of my window, just watching neighbor's house intently. I saw a few shadows moving past the windows of lit rooms, but beyond that there wasn't much exciting or intriguing. I then saw the backyard become illuminated by those cheap tiki torches you can buy at Home Depot being lit by two of the women who came outside. They were lighting the torches in a circle, if I had to guess a circle about 9 feet in diameter, but it was hard to know for sure from above 60 yards away. The rest of the crowd inside the house slowly began to fill the backyard, and I noticed something that made my skin crawl. They were all wearing white robes. They looked thin like lace or silk, rather than thick and plush like bathrobes or something more regal. This all felt way too weird for me, and the little voice in the back of my head that's way smarter than I am was telling me to just stop being curious and go to bed. But curiosity was calling to me like the Green Goblin mask, and I couldn't pull my eyes away from their yard. Soon they all stood in a circle amidst the tiki torches, each person standing in between two of them, holding hands in that circle. They all looked down towards the ground, but at the time I couldn't see what they were looking at or what they were saying. I was never good at reading lips. So in my infinite wisdom, I threw on a jacket and my shoes, ignoring the fact that I was still wearing shorts, and as quietly as I could I slipped out my backyard door. I was very thankful for the fact that we never bought one of those motion sensor lights for the backyard, only the front door. I carefully scanned the ground around me as I approached a wide row of bushes that my mom liked to keep trimmed in the yard. It was almost a perfect divide between our property and theirs, and it allowed for me to hide behind them, yet still see through enough at my neighbors. I wasn't yet close enough to hear exactly what they were saying. I could only really hear the mumbling sounds of words, but it became evident they were chanting something in near perfect unison with one another, all while their eyes remained looking downward into what I could now see with a large hole. The chanting went on for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was maybe close to 10 minutes. That's still a lot of time to be chanting, but on a cold night where you're at least partially terrified of what you're witnessing, even a few seconds feels like a painstaking eternity. What followed the chanting is something that makes me wish I had just called the police last night, or even this morning. As the chanting died down, the group began to hum in unison as two of the men went back into the house. The same two men who carried the duffel bag inside from the car. They exited the house a couple minutes later carrying that same duffel bag, then dropping it to their feet with a hefty thud right before the hole. One of them bent over and unzipped it, then they both hoisted the bag into the air, turned it over, and watched with such a grotesque lack of care on their faces as the body of a young woman toppled out and landed in the hole with another impactful thud. I couldn't tell much about the woman, but she didn't look to be more than a couple years within my age. She had blonde hair, and for some reason was only wearing black underwear as they threw her into the hole. Was she alive? I had no idea at the time. When I get nervous, I tend to chew on the side of my gums in my mouth, and as I watched all of this unfold, my molars were practically about to chew through the flesh of my inner mouth, nearly breaking skin and causing me to bleed. Fear hit me with the weight of a car at that very moment, the fact that I was witnessing this, and they were so casually doing this on our little street. I was struggling to breathe. I didn't want to watch anymore, I just couldn't. I remained crouched as I slowly began to creep back in the direction of my back door, keeping my eyes in the direction of my neighbors, just in case one of them happened to be looking around and accidentally saw me. At least I would know it. My path back to the door was a bit off from the one I took to the bushes originally, and I ended up accidentally kicking over a water bucket we used to water flowers. I had no clue if they heard it or not, but I didn't want to be a deer in headlights if they did, so I threw myself onto the grass and stayed as flat as I could. It helps that I was wearing a black coat and black shorts. I prayed to whatever god or deity could hear me that I wouldn't be seen, and I laid there for several minutes. I didn't move an inch. I barely took breaths, just to reduce the likelihood that they may see me. When I finally slowly looked up, they were gone from the backyard, and I let up the heaviest, softest sigh you can imagine. I looked around for a moment, just to make sure they weren't circling me or something crazy, and fortunately I saw their shadows moving around inside the house. They hadn't seen me. I was so relieved. I gently moved back to a crouching position, opened my back door slowly. It practically threw myself inside before slamming the deadbolt. That was perhaps the worst 20-ish minutes of my life. I wish I had just gone to sleep, so that I never had to witness any of this. When I got back to my bedroom, unfortunately I was able to see the backyard from my window, and out of the corner of my eye I saw that the tiki torches were no longer lit, but something in the yard was burning. I could see faint sparks from a fire popping up, and a growing cloud of smoke bubbled up into the air. This drained the color from my face, and the life from my body. Alive or not, they set that poor woman on fire. I was horrified and drained by that point, as it was almost 5 a.m. now. I tossed my coat onto the floor and dove into bed, but I could not fall asleep. I kept zoning out and sort of daydreaming, witnessing nightmarish events where I saw the woman in that hole burning, screaming, calling my name, all as they watched me with abyssal black eyes. I laid in bed in a semi-comatose state until almost 11 a.m., when I exhaustedly dragged myself out of bed and took a shower. When I came downstairs to make the breakfast of champions, a toasted bagel with cream cheese and a stiff drink of whiskey, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I assumed it was a text from one of my friends, or perhaps one of my parents checking on me, since I hadn't said anything to them all morning. I wish it was something that simple and carefree. However, it was a notification from a new group chat I was a part of. Most of the numbers I didn't recognize, but I knew my parents' numbers were both in there. It was a large group text started by the neighbors next door, inviting my family and most of the houses on our street to join them for a barbecue tonight. They said they spent all night and day preparing barbacoa. I threw up in my sink immediately, and have been barricaded in my bedroom ever since. I have the windows completely closed. I haven't dared to peek out at the neighbors or their barbacoa.